It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
You are looking live at the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown at Eric Balkman on Twitter. As a reminder, if you're looking for some action, we're 2 weeks away from the NFL Draft. Doesn't mean you have to wait till the NFL Draft to start drafting teams. You can win $25,000 in the FFPC Never Too Early Tournament right now. $125 entry fee at myffpc.com. Tournament's going to run all the way up to the start of the NFL Draft, and then it will stop. So it is a level playing field. People have been drafted since January. You can get in right now. I think there's fewer than 300 spots left in that tournament. A 14-week regular season. Weeks 15 through 17 will be playoffs, and then we crown a champion. Dynasty Orphans available at myffpc.com right now as well. Discounted teams available ranging from $77 all the way up to $2,500. myffpc.com. myffpc.com. And remember, there's some dollar teams out there, so you can take over a Dynasty Orphan for just $1, return it to greatness, and start cashing in on all that value right now. $100 Dynasty startups also available at myffpc.com. Let's welcome in my guest co-host tonight, a guy that I respect in the industry, as I think if Twitter's any guide, almost 50,000 of you watching also respect this guy as well. You follow him on Twitter at Dave Kluge. He is from Football Guys at footballguys.com. Dave, happy Thursday. Can you believe we're only 2 weeks away from the NFL Draft, man?
Dude, it's flying up. I can't believe it. I am actually moving on draft night. Didn't think it through whatsoever. Signed on a new place, booked my movers and everything, and then put it all together. So we had to switch it. We're moving first thing in the morning. Already got my modem set up and everything. We're going to be plugging in and have the TV ready to go as soon as we move into the new place.
Okay, so just walk me through this. So you're on April 27th, which is a Thursday.
Yes.
Crack of dawn. You are moving all your stuff, and you hope to have everything plugged in and ready to go so you can watch it. What does it start at 7 o'clock Eastern time that night?
Yeah, and we're out west, so 5 o'clock out here. But what we actually did is we've got movers coming the day before. So we're going to load the truck up on the 26th, hit the road first thing in the morning, and be ready to go by that afternoon. But, man, really didn't think that one through. So I'll be shooting from a new studio that evening, hours after moving into our new house. Should be fun.
Yeah, that is awesome because we have you on consignment from Football Guys. You took off the launching pad and landed here tonight, which we really appreciate. Is that the best way to and we'll talk about this at the end of the show. Is that the best way to get your content? Is the launching pad and then footballguys.com?
Yeah, and that's what I tell everyone nowadays. When I first got into the industry, it was you can find me on this website on this night and this show on this night, and it's great now, exclusive at Football Guys. So actually just had an episode of the Launchpad recorded a few hours ago.
Launchpad, yes.
No worries. Yeah, just recorded a few hours ago, actually, and just got it up with Nate Polvote and Herms over at Draft Sharks. I know another good friend of FFPC, and I believe he was just on the show a couple of weeks ago, right?
Exactly, yeah. Herms is great. That guy is he's very engaging, as you know. And I know you're going to be very engaging tonight. What's great about your appearance tonight, Dave, is we are going to be centering on, we'll get into some rookie stuff. I feel like we've been pounding rookies to death on this show over the last couple of weeks, and we'll get into some rookie stuff as well. But I feel what's great about this is rookies are just one part of Dynasty Fantasy Football. What you have done, and you have you have a ton of articles at footballguys.com. But the two of them that I want to focus on tonight are sort of assessing the running back landscape, assessing the wide receiver landscape in Dynasty Fantasy Football. With rookies right now, until we know landing spots and everything, it's very, very difficult to prognosticate and know what you should be doing about these guys in your Dynasty Fantasy Football leagues. But you have really lengthy articles we're going to pick apart, and we'll just basically scrape the surface on them tonight because we just don't have the time, about what you should be doing with some of these other running backs and some of these other receivers and what tiers they fall into. And I think, I was reading it, and I'm like, well, raise my eyebrows on some of these. And I think it's going to be very beneficial for all the viewers to get into that tonight. So I'm very excited about that. Let's get into the first thing I want to get to is sort of the headlines that have been going around the NFL right now. So what we have, or the latest we've had on Jahmyr Gibbs, is that the Tampa Bay Buccaneers are going to be meeting with him. And this is interesting because it was kind of like after Leonard Fournette got released, it was like, oh man, wheels up for Rachaad White. Well, maybe that's not the case if the Buccaneers decide to invest Jahmyr Gibbs. They pick they pick 19 in the first round. So I don't think they use the number 19 overall pick on him. But maybe in the second round, we could see Jahmyr Gibbs going to the Buccaneers. Now, I think the larger conversation, because Gibbs can go anywhere, Dave, the larger conversation is if the Buccaneers are meeting with a guy that would be going on day 2 and round 2 of the NFL draft, what does that mean for what they think about Rachaad White? What does this mean for Rachaad White Dynasty, stockholders in his stats? What does it mean for him? Is this, I just moved, I had Derek Brown from Fantasy Pros a couple of weeks ago on this show, and we talked about my Rachaad White trade. I moved off of Rachaad White. Where do you stand on Rachaad White after seeing this Gibbs news?
Well, I think this would be devastating for Rachaad White because Rachaad White, the majority of his fantasy production comes through the passing game. And even last year, I mean, he looked good in spurts, but as a rusher, he was terrible last year. Like one of the last ranked guys in rushing yards over expectation per attempt. That's one of my favorite efficiency metrics when measuring a running back's rushing ability. And Rachaad White was bottom of the barrel. I mean, he just couldn't get it done as a rusher, but he was a great pass catcher. And, obviously you get the benefit of catching these, feathery passes from Tom Brady. That makes it a little bit easy. But as the season went on and Leonard Fournette got banged up, he was kind of square peg in a round hole. They were forcing him to run between the tackles, and that's not what he does best. So if they're going to add any sort of running back in this draft class, I'd want them to run a guy who or draft a guy who is going to profile to take the early down work, which we know Rachaad White doesn't do well. So he could do what he does best in the passing game. But with Jahmyr Gibbs profiling as a very good pass catcher, it would be awful for Rachaad White.
And so, like, even if it's not Jahmyr Gibbs, are you of the opinion that Rachaad White is going to be able to dodge all these bullets in the draft and become the 3-down running back that Todd Bowles said he wants to do? Or is this kind of a foregone conclusion? Like, you should be moving your Rachaad White shares away right now and getting something else because his value is about to go down after the 27th.
Well, this isn't based in any sort of analysis at all, but Hutchison Brown over at Football Guys just recently came out with a video. He did a deep dive dynasty dissection on Rachaad White. Hours after posting this video, we get a DM from Rachaad White on the Football Guys Twitter page. And he said, "Hey, I know I weighed in at the combine at 215 pounds. He's like, I was 5'11", 215 at the combine. He goes, I'm 6'1", 225 now. I've grown since the NFL draft and I'm ready for a 3-down roll. He goes, if you guys are going to be talking about me, make sure you get that height and weight right. So he said that he is ready for a 3-down roll. So, I mean, granted, I think every running back, if you were going to interview them, would say the same exact thing. But yeah, I mean, just kind of a funny story there.
Yeah.
But I don't think he's ready for a 3-down roll. Regardless of what he says, I think that he showed as a rookie that he just doesn't have those chops as a rusher. So I think anybody, if they're willing to buy under the impression that he is going to have that role, I'm definitely selling him there because I think that, long term, he can profile as kind of like a Nyheim Hines type guy where he comes in on 3rd down, he can do some things in the open field, but I don't think he's ever going to be a 250 touch type player.
Makes me feel good about trading Rachaad White away. So thank you so much for that. You've already proved your weight in gold on this program tonight, Dave. Dalton Kincaid is a guy I'm very excited about for Dynasty Fantasy Football. He's a player that I think one of the warts, one of the things that had me most concerned was this back issue that he had at Utah. Now, there's 2 different ways to look at this piece of news that Adam Schefter broke to us on Twitter earlier this week. Dr. Robert Watkins, a guy who has worked with dozens of professional athletes in dealing with back injuries, sent a letter to all the NFL teams that said, quote, he is cleared to play football with no restrictions. Furthermore, in this letter, Kincaid is, quote, asymptomatic with no pain, no limitation of function for at least 3 months. Okay. Kincaid last year, 70 catches, 890 yards, 8 touchdowns. He dealt with the back issue late in the year. So, Dave, how do you look at this piece of news? Is this good that this doctor has cleared him and it sounds like he's wheels up and we could get ready to draft Dalton Kincaid in our Dynasty rookie drafts, especially in the FFPC with tight end premium scoring? Or are you a little put off that a doctor had to come out and contact all 32 teams and say, hey, this guy, I've checked him out. He's good. So don't worry about, any limitations you might have with drafting him. There's a lot. It's polarizing. Like how you could go either way on this. How are you going?
Yeah, I think anytime a doctor has to come out publicly and address something, it's probably a bigger story than they want it to be. And back problems, I'm not a doctor. I haven't looked at Dalton Kincaid. I can't tell you, anything personally here, but back problems are probably the one that scares me more than anything else because you see those get re-aggravated all the times. Maybe it's just the Bears fan in me that's still scarred from Tevin Jenkins, but I mean, this kid got drafted and it's just been 2 straight years where it's one thing after another. They said that he was going to be good for week 1, and then before the season even kicked off as a rookie, he had to have back surgery, missed almost his entire rookie year, and then it would just flare up randomly and he'd get pulled from games. So, and again, that's not how every single person with a back problem goes, but those historically linger and they do tend to flare up over time. So, having back problems at a young age isn't something that I think we should just completely ignore.
I think, and I can't remember who said this, Dave. And quite frankly, I don't remember what sport it was. It could have been, basketball or football, baseball, whatever it was. But somebody said, nobody ever says I used to have a bad back, right?
Yeah.
Because like once you have it, man, like that's sort of it. Like you're gonna have a bad back for a while.
And I don't know if you've ever had back problems, but like they are completely debilitating. Like somehow, like moving your wrist, you can feel it in your back. Like I've thrown my back out a few times, and you're just stuck on the couch for days. I mean, that is not a good injury to have.
And I bring this up too. I can't remember who I was talking with about this, but Kincaid's the type of guy. Like if maybe this back issue is fine right now, but this is the type of thing like in Dynasty, and I know we should be looking at small windows in Dynasty, and we'll get to that and coming up later this hour, next hour. But I feel like this is the type of thing that we don't necessarily notice right away in his NFL career, but maybe his career is shortened because of it. I'll tell you a story. Dave the Dizzle Gerzak, who I play in some private Dynasty leagues with, he's the FFPC co-founder. Back when Brandon Marshall was well, as you know, as a Bears fan, was playing with the Bears, went to the Jets. He actually ended up trading Brandon Marshall, not at the peak of his powers, but like kind of like at the end of his prime. And I said, why'd you trade Brandon Marshall? He's like, well, he's got this hip thing. I wonder if people think like he's actually going to play longer than he will, but this hip is going to prevent him from doing that. And lo and behold, what happened to Brandon Marshall? I think his career did get cut short. He did not play as long as probably I think a lot of people thought he would. And I wonder if this is the same thing with Kincaid, where, yeah, maybe it's fine the first few years, but maybe he doesn't play the end, the last 3 or 4 of his years or the last 3 or 4 years of his career are not as productive as you might think from a first or second round pick, whatever he's going to be, because of this back issue. It's something that we may not see and notice right away, but it's something that could crop up.
Yeah, and Marshall, just touching on that real quickly, that was weird because he kind of left at like the peak of his career. He had that season with the Jets where he went, it was like 1,400 yards and 16 touchdowns or something like that, and then just rode off to the sunset. Like it seemed like he still had years in the tank. It was almost like a TO type scenario where you expected this guy to sign, and then he just went to TV.
Saquon Barkley, a player that we think, at least I think, is going to have several more productive seasons in the NFL. Ralph Vacchiano, who covers the Giants for Fox Sports, said that the Giants apparently don't have much interest in signing Barkley to a long-term deal. Now, I don't know if that means that they don't have any interest in signing him to a long-term deal that Barkley wants to sign, or they're willing to do it, but Barkley doesn't want to do it for the low figures and the guaranteed money that the Giants want. I don't know. But Barkley said he's not going to play this season under the franchise tag. Now, Vacchiano also said he doesn't think that this is going to be a holdout lasting in the training camp. But when you have these things in fantasy football where drafts are going on right now, sometimes there's a little bit of an ADP dip with these players. And obviously when it gets to training camp, then that dip, goes back up and there's not a worry, but there's some value to be gotten with him right now. Now, currently in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, he's going as running back 5 on average at the 112. Now, he has slipped recently to as late as the 203. Is Barkley a guy that you'd want to buy the ADP dip on right now with this franchise tag news coming out?
Man, I feel like we could talk about this for like 30 minutes alone. And we just had a big, lengthy discussion, Nate Polvote and I, over at Player Profiler. We talked about this on the Launchpad earlier today. When I saw the story come out yesterday, I just shrugged. No big deal. Yeah, he's a veteran. We see this all the time. We saw it with, it seems like there's kind of 2 routes from here. Either somebody says, I'm not going to sign the franchise tag, like Allen Robinson did a few years ago, misses out on those 3 weeks of OTAs that no veteran wants to be a part of, and then signs the franchise tag. Or they say they're not going to sign the franchise tag, and then a few weeks go by, and then they end up getting their long-term extension. But with the Giants immediately coming out and saying, we're not going to give him that extension, that does concern me a little bit because Barkley historically has been a guy who, has struggled to stay healthy. Got to call it like it is. He's been injured quite a bit. And then last year, he has his first fully healthy season at age 25, and then he hits the free agency market. So I don't blame him for wanting to capitalize now. Well, he's got that opportunity, because if he goes out and, knock on wood, picks up another serious injury this year, his value is cratering and he'll never get a long-term deal. So I didn't really read too much about it at the time. I just kind of brushed it off. But then Nate kind of raised my senses a little bit to it today and started talking about, a Melvin Gordon situation, or the dreaded Le'Veon Bell situation in Pittsburgh, where he just holds out for the year and then takes out that year off and never really gets back up to speed. So, I'm still willing to buy the dip at this point, but it's not something that I'm completely confident in that he's going to play this year.
Let's do a quick would you rather on this. Excuse me, Dave. So Saquon Barkley, and I'm going to reference this from that Never Too Early Best Ball tournament. So redraft, not Dynasty. And we'll get into some of these players later on. Saquon Barkley or Breece Hall?
This is a tough one, because I actually am a little bit higher on Breece. So I'm taking Breece here, even with the ACL. I just think that, when you need those all-important weeks at the end of the season, when you're in the playoffs, I think he'll be back to 100% by then. So even if he gets off to a slow start, I prefer Breece.
Saquon Barkley or Derrick Henry?
Taking Barkley there pretty easily.
Saquon Barkley or Josh Jacobs?
Also taking Saquon Barkley.
Okay, we're getting a little bit higher. Saquon Barkley or Kenneth Walker?
Going Saquon here as well.
Okay. Saquon Barkley or Bijan Robinson?
And this is where I switch, and I'll take Bijan over Saquon.
And I'm assuming that McCaffrey, Eckler, Taylor, you're taking all three of those over Barkley?
Yeah.
Okay. All right. There you have it, ladies and gentlemen. All right. We're a fantasy football show. We're a football show. We're contractually obligated to talk about the latest soap opera that's gaining all the ratings around the NFL and fantasy football podcasts and shows like this one on the Better Sports Network. Aaron Rodgers, will he ever be a New York Jet? Now, Dave, I have another show I do here locally in Northeast Wisconsin. I've been saying tongue-in-cheek for about a month now, or ever since the Pat McAfee show, when Rodgers said his intention is to play for the Jets, but the Jets said Packers have to work out the compensation. I've been saying tongue-in-cheek, this trade's never going to happen. He's going to be starting with the Packers again this year. Jordan Love's going to be a backup, and the Jets are going to get Ryan Tannehill or something like that. It started as a joke, and now I'm wondering if there's actually some truth to this. Like, is there a chance that Rodgers just doesn't get traded, and that the Jets and the Packers play a game of chicken, and ultimately they both lose, where the Packers want to turn the page to Jordan Love, yet they're forced to start Aaron Rodgers? The Jets have all the ingredients at the table. I always say it's like worm and rounders. You got the Luger, you got the plate, you got the scotch, you got the sauce, everything. All you need is the steak, right? All the Jets need is the steak at quarterback. That's what they don't have right now. They got the playmakers, they got the defense, they got the coaching. They just don't have the quarterback. And certainly if they turn to Tannehill, they lose in this and not have Rodgers. Your thoughts on Rodgers to the Jets right now? Is this going to happen? And how do we as fantasy football players, how do we draft Packers and Jets skill position players accordingly, believing what we think is going to happen or what's not going to happen?
So immediately following the Pat McAfee show, I wrote an entire article about like the implication of, what would happen if Aaron Rodgers landed in the New York Jets. And obviously it would be fun. And, they're doing everything they can, bringing in his boy, Alan Lazard. And, they're doing what they need to get him. But I don't want to pat myself on the back too hard, but back-to-back years now, I have nailed the Aaron Rodgers situation. Everyone thought he was retiring last year, and I said he is going back to Green Bay. The year before, everyone thought he was going to retire. I said he was going back to Green Bay. I think he retires this year. I don't think he goes back to Green Bay. I don't think he ends up on the Jets. I think that this is going to get pulled back and forth, and eventually he's just going to say, you know what, screw it. If you guys can't work out a deal, I'm done. It seems like the bridge is burned with Green Bay at this point. I think, he's a prideful guy, and he is as a complicated fella. There's always something going on there. But one thing we know about Aaron Rodgers is that once that bridge is burned, whether it's with a teammate or his family, that bridge is burned. And I think it's already burned with Green Bay. So I don't expect him to go back there. And if they can't work out a trade for the Jets, which right now the reports are that they're asking a first and a second, I don't think there's any chance the Jets are giving that up. So I think that we might just see Aaron Rodgers walk away. The one thing that makes me think Aaron Rodgers won't come back or might come back is because he doesn't want to be in that Hall of Fame class with Tom Brady. He wants
Right.
to be the premier guy in the Hall of Fame class. And if he retires this year, him and Tom Brady get inducted together. But I still think that he ends up walking this year. I think we've seen the last Aaron Rodgers.
Is there, I mean, how big of a chance is there in your mind? Because, like, let's say this happens, right? So before Rodgers makes an announcement, this is going to leak out that, hey, Rodgers is thinking about retirement. He's probably going to retire, and he's not going to go to the Jets, right? If that happens and Brian Gutekunst, the GM of the Packers, finds out and he says to Joe Douglas, he's like, "Look, man, enough's enough. He wants to retire. I don't know what's going on here, but if you give us 1 second-round pick in 2024, he's all yours, right?" Don't you think at that point, if that comes out, the Jets and Packers would find a way to make this happen? So, because I think Rodgers wants to stick it to the Packers, and I think that would be and we've heard reports too, Dave, that Rodgers is already telling Joe Douglas, "Hey, don't back down, stay strong. The Packers are going to cave on this." And maybe this is something that happens, maybe not before the NFL draft, but maybe in June, maybe in August, maybe in September. We know Rodgers is not a big fan of doing the voluntary workouts with the Packers. Maybe that carries over with the Jets. There's got to be a non-zero chance of that, right?
Yeah, and it's weird right now because all of the leverage is on the Jets side, but the Packers are acting like they have the leverage for some reason. So yeah, I'm with you. I think that Rodgers, I don't know a better word to use than petty, but I think that he is a little petty and he does
Yeah.
want to stick it to the Packers, but he could stick it to him by retiring too, because if he
Yes.
retires, he sticks them with a boatload of dead cap. So that's why I think the one outcome that isn't that possible is him going back to Green Bay. I think the two possibilities are the Jets or retirement.
And Charles Robinson from Yahoo had the story this week that, Rodgers said he was 90% retired,
Mhm.
and then he decided to come back and his intention is to play with the Jets. And then Woody Johnson backed off the whole, "Oh, we're going to give you a first and a second. Now we don't know if we want to give you an unconditional first to Green Bay if this guy is going to retire after this year." So I think he's already sort of stuck it to the Packers. If Charles Robinson's reporting is to be believed, and I think it is, he's usually pretty solid on a lot of his stuff. He's already kind of stuck it to the Packers in the fact that he might have cost him a first-round pick by going on McAfee and saying, "Yeah, I was 90% retired." All of a sudden, Woody Johnson's like, "Whoa, hold the phone. We met with you in California, and you didn't bring this up at all."
But what did they expect? Did they think they were going to trade for a 39-year-old QB and get 10 years out of him? I mean, is it really that surprising?
Yeah. It's such this, like, I don't remember, like a lot of the stuff I say about Aaron Rodgers lately, I don't remember a story like this ever in the NFL, where you have two teams playing a game of chicken with trades. You have darkness retreats and ayahuasca and COVID toe and all this other. It's been such a bizarre ride. COVID toe, yeah. With
about that.
And the COVID MVPs that he always talks about. It's been crazy, man. And we haven't seen the last of it, so there's more to come on this. All right, so let's talk about this CJ Stroud news. So what we found out today, and I'm trying to find the source on this right now, but CJ Stroud once believed that he was the de facto, like he's going to be the number one pick. There's no chance he's not after the Carolina Panthers made that deal with the Bears to trade up. Now, all of a sudden, we see the betting odds on several different sports books shift that Bryce Young might be the number one overall pick and the betting favorite to be the number one overall pick. And as a result, well, I don't know if as a result, but CJ Stroud is doing sort of a tour right now in the NFL. So not only Tom Pelissero from the NFL Network, by the way, reported that Stroud visited the Raiders yesterday, I think it was, or is it today? It was 2 days ago. Sorry. So Stroud visited the Raiders 2 days ago, and he's visiting with the Lions and the Colts before the week is up. Lions obviously are not in the top four. They probably have to move up to take them, but the Colts pick fourth, and obviously that Arizona pick is getting a lot of hype right now as far as a team that could go up and trade and make the first three picks of the draft quarterbacks. Maybe the first four picks of the draft will be quarterbacks. That will remain to be seen. What do you think is going on with Stroud right now? What do you think happens with the number one pick of the draft, and where does Stroud end up?
Man, that's a loaded question. You just asked me three separate questions.
And then they all tie in together. You're a pro, and I know you're going to give me a great answer.
Yeah, I mean, this is really tough. This is one of the weirdest drafts I can remember. Everyone keeps talking about how loaded this quarterback class is, but typically when we see a really loaded quarterback class, there's always that one guy that is like the premier guy. Your Trevor Lawrence or your Andrew Luck, your Peyton Manning, your John Elway. And here we are 2 weeks away from the draft, and we don't even know who the number one pick is going to be. So I don't know, man. It's all speculative here. I really don't know what I can say that hasn't already been said. The one thing I think is that Bryce Young, his agent and Adam Schefter's agent work for the same agency. So I think that there's a little bit of a conflict of interest there where, they're kind of working together. We hear all of this, the S2 testing coming out about, Bryce Young being one of the fastest processors ever. It seems like there is a very strong effort to push Bryce Young up because it seemed like 2 weeks ago, there was no question in the world that Carolina wasn't taking CJ Stroud here. So I think we're just in smokescreen season where I can't even see my hand in front of my face with all the disinformation going around. I still expect Stroud to go number one. And I think that he's doing the right thing by meeting with the other teams because who knows, maybe he meets with Detroit, completely knocks his interview out of the, and then they decide that they want to trade up. I mean, Carolina has already said that they entertained the idea of trading back from one. This is a weird draft, man. There's a lot of QB needy teams, and there's a lot of QB needy teams sitting inside the top 10. And then there's 4 guys that all realistically deserve to go there. So my gut right now, my betting man, my money is on CJ Stroud to go number 1 to Carolina. But I think that he's doing the right thing by still meeting with other teams just in case he ends up blowing them away in an interview.
Your colleagues at Football Guys, Cecil Lammy, Sigmund Bloom, they always say April is the season of liars, right? This is when you and Lammy always says it too. He's like, look, if I wasn't hearing this stuff in January and February, and now all of a sudden I'm hearing April, it's probably not all that trustworthy information. And all of a sudden we see Bryce Young flip like this. Well, maybe this is a case where it's, Occam's razor. Stroud is probably the most obvious choice to be going number 1, which is everything we've heard for the last month and a half up until, like you said, 2 weeks ago. And now all of a sudden we're hearing Young. Maybe it still is Stroud going to the Carolina Panthers. We're 2 weeks away from finding out. That's going to be very interesting. DeAndre Hopkins in the news again. Jonathan Gannon, the new Cardinals head coach, this according to Josh Weinfuss on Twitter, says that Gannon said, we'll see when it comes to whether DeAndre Hopkins is going to show up to voluntary workouts for Arizona. Gannon also said when he's ready to come, he'll come. Now, Hopkins posted on Instagram of him working out at a facility that wasn't the Cardinals, and God bless him, because if he was working at the Cardinals facility, he'd be paying for all his meals there, and we don't want that. Gannon said that they want to do what's best for the Cardinals and what's best for DeAndre Hopkins because they've been trying to work out this trade. Now, it sounds like he will be traded. I have not heard any potential teams that are particularly interested in taking on his contract right now. But the weird thing that we have to figure out as fantasy football drafters here in early April is what are we doing with Hopkins? Never too early FFPC best ball tournament. He's wide receiver 17. He's going at the 406. He's behind DK Metcalf. He's behind Deebo Samuel. He's going ahead of Amari Cooper, Drake London, and DJ Moore. Now, when you're on the clock here in the mid 4th round, Dave, and Hopkins is still on the board, and you're looking at a wide receiver, is that the price that you want to be in business with Hopkins? Is it too cheap? Is it too expensive? How do you handle Hopkins right now?
No, man, that's Goldilocks. That's just right. That's exactly where I think he deserves to be because right now, I mean, where he's at in Arizona might be his worst case scenario. And even there, it's still going to be a somewhat pass heavy offense, and he doesn't have a ton of target competition. Now, the other options are that he gets traded. And if he does get traded, it's going to be to a team that wants to contend. There isn't any bottom of the barrel roster that's going to say, we need DeAndre Hopkins right now. So if he gets traded anywhere, it's going to be Buffalo. It's going to be Kansas City. It's going to be one of these teams that is going to make a push that needs another wide receiver. So I think right now where you're drafting him is in the worst case scenario. He can only really go up from here. The talks about him not showing up to camp or holding out or something like that. He's too late in his career for a holdout. I think that he's just going to do what he's done his entire career. I mean, he did it in Houston on some terrible offenses there. He did it last year when Kyler Murray was hurt. He's a consummate professional. He's going to show up and he's going to do his thing. I'm not too concerned about it. Like I said, this is kind of the worst case scenario he can be in, and any move from here is just going to boost his value. So I'm okay drafting him at wide receiver 17.
There's a couple of things here. So number one, DeAndre Hopkins, as you just pointed out, no Kyler Murray last year, but he was still putting up numbers without Kyler Murray. And the other point that you brought up, if he is with Arizona, like if you invest in DeAndre Hopkins right now, you're rooting for him to be traded from Arizona. Right. But even if he's not in the mid 4th round, this is still a good price for him. So this to me is I wouldn't even say just right like you did. To me, this sounds like he's a bargain because odds are he's probably going to go up. He's not going to go any lower. Now is the time to get your DeAndre Hopkins shares, right?
Yeah, because even if he stays in Arizona, like you said, probably worst case scenario, he's still seeing 10 to 12 targets a game in Arizona,
Yeah.
and he's still going to be the only red zone threat there. So, I think he kind of talked me into thinking that he might be more of a bargain than priced appropriately.
Fantasy Alarm, by the way, has all the fantasy football and betting content you need to prepare for the NFL draft and the upcoming NFL season, featuring Britt Flynn's mock draft, rookie scouting reports, NFL team needs, player projections, Discord chat, and more. For a limited time, get the complete NFL package plus DFS playbooks for all sports and an additional 20% off the already discounted annual price with promo code NFL Draft at fantasyalarm.com. That's promo code NFL Draft at fantasyalarm.com. I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC and the High Stakes Fantasy Footballer, the road of his High Stakes Lowdown. He is Dave Kluge from footballguys.com and the Launchpad podcast, which we're going to be talking about coming up in the second hour. What I want to get into in the next segment is your Dynasty Landscape series. I want to talk receivers in the next segment. We'll get into CeeDee Lamb. We'll get into Jalen Waddle. We'll talk a little bit about Deebo Samuel, who I think is a very confounding receiver for Dynasty Fantasy Football. I think you'd agree. And then we'll get into running backs coming up in the second part of the show, or the second hour of the show. We're also going to get into some of the other things that you have in your rankings that to me stood out for people who are drafting best ball teams right now. Dave Kluge, Eric Balkman here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back, only on the Better Sports Network.
Moose and Keith, weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Better Sports Network.
Calvin Ridley yesterday, he applied for reinstatement from the National Football League.
Ridley, Kirk, Zay Jones, Travis Etienne, Trevor Lawrence. That is crazy potent on offense.
Yeah, it's going to be awesome. I mean, Ridley's great.
I think Trevor Lawrence is a guy I want in fantasy this year.
I think you're probably right. I think they're just going to get better and better. First off, Peterson's a wonderful offensive mind, a great head coach, and we've seen that and saw that this year as Jacksonville made it to the postseason. And Trevor Lawrence, anybody that questioned whether or not he could play in the National Football League or just how good he was going to be in the NFL, those questions were answered this past season as in the second half of the year. Statistically speaking, he was a top 3 quarterback in the NFL. That's how good Trevor Lawrence is. You throw Calvin Ridley into the mix, it's going to be great. Yeah, I think Lawrence is a guy you want. I think Ridley's a guy you want. Clearly, Travis Etienne is going to be one of those early, first-round selections as well, being the dual-threat running back that he is, not only running, but also catching the ball out of the backfield, Keith, and the ability to take something small and take it to the house. Take a 5-yard dump pass, make a guy miss in the open field, and he's gone. I mean, you saw that with Travis Etienne this past season for Jacksonville. Yeah, sky's the limit. I mean, I think you're going to go from a team in the year span where you wanted no part of the Jacksonville Jaguars when you're looking at fantasy football to where you want as many Jaguars as you possibly can because they're going to be really, really productive. And let's see if they get their tight end back as well, who had
Evan Ingram was great.
And Evan Ingram, who was great this past season.
Yeah. I mean, if they keep that whole core together, their offense is going to be one of the best in football. Like, I legitimately think that they could be one of the best offenses in football.
Zay Jones, Evan Ingram, Christian Kirk, then
and Ridley,
Travis Etienne, Trevor Lawrence, a good offensive line, and you've got Doug Peterson being creative calling.
Right?
And you look at that division. The Colts are a mess.
Yep.
Titans
look like they're on the downslide.
Titans are on the downslide, right? That window is clearly closed. And then you got the Houston Texans.
Years away from relevancy.
Yeah.
I mean, Jacksonville could win 11 games next year.
Moose and Keith, weekdays at 10 a.m. Eastern on Better Sports Network. High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
27 minutes until the top of the hour here on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman, at Eric Balkman on Twitter, FFPC, High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, road of his High Stakes Lowdown. He is Dave Kluge, at Dave Kluge on Twitter. Footballguys.com, Launchpad Podcast is where you can get all of his analysis. And speaking of analysis, let's get into this, ladies and gentlemen. At 9 a.m. and 5 p.m. Eastern, it's Fantasy Alarm MLB DFS Playbook with John and Pemba, James Grande. Noon Eastern, the 5-pack with Kyle Elfrink. At 3 Eastern, it's the Fantasy Football Game Show with Front Yard Fantasy. 6 p.m. Eastern, Quick Outs Fantasy Football with Andrew Cooper and John and Pemba. All our shows at bettersportsnetwork.com. Bettersports.com, Better Sports Network app, or wherever you stream live video. Now, there's no live video attributed to this, but Dave, you're assessing the landscape series at footballguys.com. I was talking with Anthony before the show started today, our producer, Anthony Rivera, and he's like, well, we should get to the assessing the quarterback landscape. I'm like, dude, we only have 2 hours. And like, if we had 3 hours, I would love to get in the quarterbacks. In my opinion, the FFPC viewers love running backs, receivers, and especially tight ends. Are you gonna add an assessing the tight end landscape coming up?
I will. I'm working on it right now, and it should be out by next week.
Perfect. Excellent. So let's talk about the fresh one. And I think the receiver landscape, this one just came out today, right?
Yeah, just released this morning. I wrote this on Monday. Was expecting it to come out Friday, but got an early release on it. So that was a fun surprise this morning.
Can you kind of tell the viewers a little bit, not just with the receiver landscape piece, but all these pieces that you're working on with Football Guys? What are you trying to accomplish with this series?
Well, I think the main thing is trying to show a little bit of my process. So many people just kind of shoot from the hip with how they analyze and evaluate players. And I want to kind of give people a peek behind the curtain as to how I look at wide receivers and running backs and quarterbacks, what things I think are important. When talking about the running backs, which we'll talk about a little bit later, there's really only two things I care about. And that is, their talent level, which, is very subjective, but I've got my own way of figuring that out, and age. And then with quarterbacks, you got to worry about scheme and public perception and teammates and coaching and so many other things. With wide receivers, I think that's one of the easiest to project for. First of all, we're pretty good overall. I think the whole monolith of NFL scouting and all of that is pretty good at projecting how wide receivers are going to translate into the NFL. And then we have strong indications early in a wide receiver's career as to how they're going to do. It's very rare that we see somebody come out as a rookie, put up really good numbers, and then just fall into oblivion. That doesn't happen often. In the same vein, we typically don't see guys struggle early on in their career and then blossom into really good receivers. So, what I look at, obviously age and talent, but then early career production is important as well. And this is obviously for Dynasty when we're looking on a long-term scale. So, obviously situations matter more on the short term, but I think with Dynasty, you're able to buy these guys that have great profiles and they might not be producing at that moment, but you just have to kind of trust the process and hope that long-term they're going to develop into a better player. Marquise Brown was one of the guys that I talked about in my article who I'd been pounding the table for years. Had Marquise Brown on just about every single one of my Dynasty rosters. And I was pulling my hair out wondering, what am I doing wrong? Because this guy just isn't producing. He's giving me wide receiver 3 seasons every single year. And then boom, gets traded to Arizona. All of a sudden he's seeing 10.7 targets per game, wide receiver 5 in scoring. And I said, there you go. It took 3-4 years, but finally saw the Marquise Brown that I knew was in there.
I want to, and this isn't just from casual Dynasty players. I think some high stakes Dynasty players, especially at the FFPC, I think they have this thing set in their head. Okay, wide receiver in Dynasty, who's throwing to them? What type of offense are they in? Obviously. But I think in reading your article, I don't want to put words in your mouth. Do you think those things, quarterback situations, do you think those are a little bit overrated in assessing wide receivers in Dynasty?
Especially in Dynasty, yeah. And I think for short term, once we get closer to week 1, that's when I kind of take my Dynasty hat off and I start doing my projections and look at single season. And then you're looking at very disparate systems where you kind of have to look at the system. I talk about in the article the difference between the Tampa Bay Buccaneers and the Chicago Bears offenses last year. I mean, could not be more polar opposite than they were. But literally, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers were 3 pass attempts away from doubling what the Chicago Bears did in pass volume last year. On top of that, you've got, very accurate passes coming from Tom Brady and kind of errant passes coming from Justin Fields. So trying to compare these two players in these two systems is ridiculous, because if you look at the overall volume, you'd think that Russell Gage was a better player than Darnell Mooney, and you'd think that, Cade Otton was a better player than Cole Kmet, when really we're trying to look at the rate metrics and the route run metrics to see what types of players these are. Chris Godwin and Mike Evans each had over 150 targets. Leonard Fournette had 83 targets. 3 other guys on the team had over 50 targets. And then when you look at the Bears, it was Cole Kmet, Darnell Mooney, who had 61 and 69 targets. That was it for the Bears as above 50 target players. So, Yeah, if you're looking on the short term, if you're looking just at the 2023 season alone and you're looking to contend, that's when you want to start looking at the guys that are going to stumble into volume. Last year, Russell Gage is another great example of a guy that long term in Dynasty, I didn't want anything to do with Russell Gage. But when he got traded to Tampa Bay and I knew that they were going to be throwing the ball 700 times, then all of a sudden Russell Gage looks like a viable wide receiver 3, wide receiver 4. But he wasn't a guy that I wanted anything to do with in Dynasty, but I was okay drafting him in redraft and best ball leagues.
Jordan McNamara, a guy we've had on this show before, in fact, probably about a month or so ago, expert when it comes to Dynasty fantasy football. He published a great Football Guys piece about Dynasty wide receivers and target volume, and how target volume is a really good metric to look at when assessing the proper value for fantasy football wide receivers in Dynasty. However, as I look at this and I read your article, is there a better metric that we should be looking at rather than target volume? I think you kind of touched on this with the Tampa-Chicago comparison, but there might be something else that we should be looking at, right?
Yeah, I think the per run data tells us so much more than overall target volume. So looking at how many targets they can draw per route run. And that was something that I kind of scoffed at years ago, if I'm being honest. I used to say, that's too much in the weeds for me, way too analytical. But the more I, started paying attention to these numbers, I found out how durable they are and how sticky they are year over year. And, I talked about Marquise Brown, but let's talk about another guy on the opposite end of the spectrum, or maybe not on the opposite end of the spectrum, but at that point in his career, you can look at Drake London and Kyle Pitts as two guys who are elite target earners. But the problem is there aren't a lot of targets that go around in Atlanta. And last year, the targets were coming from Marcus Mariota and they were coming from Desmond Ridder, and they weren't very accurate. So they were low value targets on a low volume offense. So these guys are a change situation away from exploding in value. So what happens if, let's say, for some reason, we were talking about the Jets earlier. What if things fall through and somehow, some way, Atlanta ends up trading for Aaron Rodgers? Then all of a sudden we're looking at Kyle Pitts as probably the tight end 1 overall getting drafted in 2023 leagues. We're looking at Drake London as a potential top 10 redraft wide receiver. Or what happens if Kyle Pitts gets traded to the Chargers, where we've got an aging Keenan Allen and an aging Mike Williams, and he could be a featured part of a high volume offense? We already know the profile for Kyle Pitts and Drake London. They're elite target earners. They get a lot of air yards for their team's respective pie. But the problem is they're taking a huge slice out of a tiny, tiny little pie. So again, this is looking at long-term assessment. Kyle Pitts is a guy that I love in Dynasty. If I'm just trying to hold value, if I have a team that isn't competing right this moment, I'll hold on to a guy like Kyle Pitts. But if I'm trying to compete, and I'm trying to contend this year, I'm okay moving off of Kyle Pitts because we still might be another 2-3 years away from seeing that inevitable breakout.
Yeah, are you the same way with Drake London as you are with Kyle Pitts?
Yeah, I love both of these guys long term, but we might not see it this year. I mean, there's a very good possibility that Desmond Ridder isn't that good, and Desmond Ridder is the starter for 17 weeks, and we see another season where they're throwing the ball under 400 times and they're errant, inaccurate passes. And then on top of that, you've got Kyle Pitts and Drake London cannibalizing each other, which adds another element to this. So as much as I love those players, unless there is a drastic change, I mean, even Ryan Tannehill would be enough for me to get excited about these guys. If they can bring in somebody that I know can support a decent passing offense. But right now, as it is with Desmond Ridder, I'm just not too thrilled about it.
We talk about guys like London and Pitts. You mentioned Marquise Brown earlier. Like when you look at these underlying metrics as far as like per run, like what yards, per route run, I think that these are the types of things that we have these players laying in plain sight, right? That we can see dynasty values of these guys. You just got to be able to look a little bit deeper. And then if Pitts breaks out, and then if London breaks out, like Marquise Brown just broke out, we can point to this and say, well, we should have seen this coming, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and you could say the same thing with DJ Moore, who is another great example of a guy who was always on a team without good quarterbacks, low volume, and unfortunately he got traded to another team that might be low volume, but the indications show, an investment in Chase Claypool and an investment in DJ Moore and an investment in offensive line probably show that they're looking to change that philosophy up a little bit. But at the same time, if we're looking at the same Bears offense from last year, DJ Moore isn't going to explode.
So this is what I wanted to bring, because you're a Bears fan, right? Obviously.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So this is the thing. When you have Mooney and Claypool and Moore now in Chicago,
and Kmet,
obviously, totally. You have a situation. We had Pat Kerrane on here, probably about a month or so ago, and Pat said, I think it was Pat that said DJ Moore is like the biggest dynasty sell. As soon as he got traded, like you got to get rid of him. I want to pick your brain as maybe a biased fan, maybe an unbiased fan. who are the Bears that you want to have in this offense this year? Now that, I mean, I can't remember the last time they've had 4 really good weapons on the perimeter as they do right now in Mooney, Moore, Claypool, and Kmet. This is an interesting offense for this season because, as you said, I think the Bears want to get out there and have a more traditional modern, it's kind of an oxymoron, but a traditional modern passing game right this year with Fields. But because we didn't really get to see that last year, it's a little bit difficult to see in our dynasty leagues right now.
So I think there's a ton of risk with any Bears player right now, if I'm being honest. I mean, I was one of Justin Fields' biggest touts last year. I had him projected for over 1,000 yards, and I was called crazy, all sorts of names that I won't even say on this show. But people thought I was literally insane for projecting him for 1,000 yards. But there were no weapons, and I knew he had the athleticism. I was expecting him to run a lot, and he did run a lot. So this year, I'm a little bit nervous because what we're expecting is a change in offensive philosophy for everybody to live up to their ADP. Long term, though, I'm not quite as nervous. And I don't know if I agree with the fact that DJ Moore is a sell in Dynasty because there's 2 outcomes that I see. The one outcome is immediate return, where Justin Fields does take a step forward as a passer, and he's able to support an offense where DJ Moore can actually produce. The other option is that Justin Fields doesn't take that step forward as a passer, and DJ Moore sucks this year, and his value dips even further. And then the Bears make a switch the following season to another quarterback, whether that be somebody on the trade market or whether they are so bad that they end up with the number 1 overall pick again and end up with Caleb Williams. So I think long term, you can still invest in a guy like DJ Moore because he's shown the peripheral underlying metrics year after year after year. Even if he doesn't put it together this year, the worst case scenario for him is that he plays for the Bears on a new team or on the same team with a new quarterback when he's 27 years old, still relatively young for a wide receiver. So I'm not all that concerned about his long-term, profile, but I am a little bit concerned about the 2023 projections.
We're talking about you're assessing the wide receiver dynasty landscape. I want to get into some of the tiers that you have listed on there. And first, number 1, the elite tier. So you have Justin Jefferson in his own tier, right? And then the next level, Chase, Lamb, and A.J. Brown. I look at Lamb and A.J. Brown. Those stand out a little bit to me. And then as I read further, these guys were not in the elite tier last year. Why did these guys make it up to the elite tier this year? Why are you looking at these guys as the elite wide receivers in Dynasty Fantasy Football that you want to get your hands on?
Because they were finally able to put it together. That's pretty much what it is. These guys were fringe elite last year because like like Marquise Brown and like DJ Moore and like Kyle Pitts and these other guys that we talk about that have great profiles, they displayed those great profiles, but we hadn't really seen the production yet. And obviously it was because AJ Brown was on a low volume offense. So like we talk about these other guys that you want to invest in the profiles, their change situation away from exploding in value. That's exactly what happened with AJ Brown. He was showing us that he was an elite target earner. He was showing us that he was efficient with the touches that he had. He can draw targets deep downfield. He could get yards after the catch. He could score in the red zone. He could do all of these things. But the problem is he was getting 80 to 100 targets a year and didn't really have the volume to support his fantasy ADP. And then all of a sudden he gets traded to Philadelphia, where this Jalen Hurts-led powerhouse offense allows him to set career highs in targets and receptions and yards and, just across the board. He finally exploded. So then you're able to move him up into that elite tier because now he put it all together. We saw the profile and we saw the good situation. They combined together, and that's why we were able to see that. CeeDee Lamb was another interesting player. I wasn't really too excited about CeeDee Lamb. We can talk a little bit about my process, but I don't really look too much at college production. I wait until I see where they get drafted, where they land, and draft capital is an important part of my process. And CeeDee Lamb, his rookie season, he showed some, good metrics, but not enough to garner the elite tag that everybody else was putting on him. If you remember, after his rookie season, he was getting drafted as the wide receiver 3 in Dynasty, and I thought that was a little bit too steep. Finally put it together last year, though. And again, it just had to do with a healthy Dak Prescott. The year before, he was playing with Ben DiNucci and Cooper Rush and couldn't really do too much. But now we've seen back-to-back seasons with 120 plus targets, 1,100 plus yards. So now he is also, he had one he displayed the underlying metrics for years, had one season with a healthy Dak Prescott and a good offense, and was able to put it all together into a very productive season. So that moves him up into the elite tier because it shows that the profile we invested in met up with the good situation and turned into a lot of fantasy production.
The fringe elite is the next tier. And in reading what you had to say about these guys, and footballguys.com is your go-to where you want to check out this article. I won't talk about all of them there, but I do want to talk about Jalen Waddle. it seemed like of everybody in that fringe elite tier, this was the player that I think, I don't want to say worry is the right word, but maybe that you worried most that he would not be in this as high in this tier next year, that he might fall out of it. Is he in danger this season, depending upon how things go in Miami, of him not being in the fringe elite and maybe dropping down to the next tier?
Absolutely, yeah, and I'll just list off the other guys that are in here real quickly. Amon-Ra St. Brown, Devonta Smith, DK Metcalf, T. Higgins. The one thing that everybody in this tier has in common is that they all have stiff target competition. I mean, every single guy that I just named, you can talk about who the other guy is on that team. They're all part of a really dynamic duo. The difference is all of these guys were drawing elite target shares. I mean, Devonta Smith was still at 27.8% last year. Amon-Ra St. Brown, 28%. All these guys were still drawing a ton of targets. The difference with Jalen Waddle is that he was putting up a lot of efficiency. So he's kind of the outlier in this group because everybody else is an elite target earner. Jalen Waddle is not the elite target earner, but he was highly efficient with his targets. On the flip side, as a rookie, we saw Jalen Waddle as an elite target earner. So we've kind of seen a tale of two seasons with Jalen Waddle. As a rookie, he was getting a ton of targets and wasn't especially efficient with them. As a sophomore, Tyreek Hill shows up in the picture, takes a huge chunk of the targets. Jalen Waddle doesn't see as much as we'd like him to see, but then on the little bit of volume he does get, he's extremely efficient with it. He was outside of the top 35 in both target share and targets per route run, and that is worrisome to me. You had mentioned briefly Deebo Samuel a little bit earlier, but that's kind of the comp that I see is where you're relying on elite efficiency. Now, Jalen Waddle is still very, very young, and Tyreek Hill isn't going to be around forever. So that's why I still keep him in that fringe elite tier, because my guess, and this is purely a guesstimation, but Tyreek Hill led the league in target share last year. I mean, he is not nobody is going to show up on a team with Tyreek Hill unless you're Travis Kelce in his prime and be able to garner an elite target share. So I think that as we see Tyreek Hill start to lose a step and get a little bit older, which he's getting to that point, I think that we kind of see the changing of the guard where Jalen Waddle can get back up to the wide receiver one status. So he's definitely the riskiest one here, but he still is a very premium elite asset in dynasty leagues.
When you talk about Jalen Waddle potentially falling off this tier, Dave, I don't see a reason right now in your dynasty leagues that you can't get 100 cents on the dollar for Jalen Waddle if you want to move him right now. Is that something that you would recommend to, novice or even, experienced high stakes fantasy football dynasty players? Is that something you recommend right now?
Yeah, and I had this conversation with Matt Waldman just yesterday, but it is kind of crazy because his ceiling right now, or I'm sorry, his consensus ranking right now is wide receiver 6, and that's pretty much his ceiling when he's on a team with Tyreek Hill. So the question kind of is with Jalen Waddle, you're not drafting this guy. He's not going to give you a Justin Jefferson, Jamar Chase, AJ Brown type of season. You're kind of drafting him with the hopes that he just retains his production as a back end wide receiver 1. So then it's kind of a game theory question. Like, are you willing to pay a wide receiver 6 price tag for a guy that you expect to have 3 or 4 seasons of back end wide receiver 1 production? I don't know if I am necessarily. So he's a guy that if you can get him, if you've got him on your roster and you could trade him as a top 6 asset and somebody's willing to pay that sort of price, if you can get a Kyle Pitts or if you can get a Breece Hall, which is where, the ADP is kind of similar to right now, I would do that in a heartbeat.
What the productive veteran tier is chock full of guys that are going in the first couple of rounds of redraft leagues. And I think in dynasty fantasy football leagues, sometimes these are the players that we move off of a little bit too soon and we end up kicking ourselves. However, if you have a squad right now that is not going to compete, maybe you're taking over an orphan at myffpc.com. You don't like the team for 2023, but 2024, you see potential. You're not going to compete this year. And if you have a guy, we talked about some of them, Tyreek Hill, DeAndre Hopkins, Cooper, Lockett, Diggs, Adams, all those guys on this tier. If you have one of those, what kind of return should you be expecting? Because these are difficult guys to trade in dynasty. The guys who are 29 and over. What's fair return for these guys, knowing that, look, they've been crushing it. They're probably still going to crush it for a little bit, but what's the proper return in dynasty for players like these?
Well, first of all, what I'll say is don't trade them right now. Just the kind of the cycle of the dynasty season. This is the time of year where everybody has draft fever. Everybody's got rookie fever. Everybody wants those draft picks. So right now, if you try trading away a player, you're not going to be getting the full value for him because people are so desperate for wanting picks that, you're probably not getting anything better than a second round pick in return for one of these guys. What you want to do is wait until the season, And then you look at those contending rosters and say, this guy's got a glaring weakness at his wide receiver 2 spot. Let me see if I can get him to give me a first round pick for Cooper Kupp. Let me see if I can get him a first round pick for Stephon Diggs or one of these guys. You're probably not going to get that right now because everybody's clutching onto their picks and holding them so tightly and trying to get as many picks as they can before this rookie draft. So ideally, you're not flipping these guys for any less than a first round pick. I mean, once we get a little bit down that tier a little bit, with the Amari Cooper, Tyler Lockett, maybe you can take a second round pick for them and feel happy about it. But as far as, if I'm on a rebuilding roster where there is no reason for me to have Cooper Kupp, Tyreek Hill, Devontae Adams, Stephon Diggs, your best course of action is to wait until the season kicks off and then trade them because that's when their value is going to be maximized.
Al Paul's in the YouTube chat right now. I want to get to his comment in a second, but just to piggyback on what we were just talking about, would you be willing to give up draft picks for these types of players right now to get them on your roster, keep them on your roster till August or September, and then flip them for hopefully a first round plus?
I mean, that's a great technique if you can do it. But the fear is that if you aren't contending and you don't have that roster spot for one of these guys, that you trade a second round pick for a guy like Cooper Kupp. And, let's just say Cooper Kupp doesn't bounce back from his foot injury. Right. And it's apparent, in week 1 that he lost a step and he's not doing what we expect Cooper Kupp to do, which is 22 points just about every single time he steps on the field. And if he does that, then you're just SOL and you're holding the bag on a guy that you didn't really want to begin with. So I never think it's a good idea to try to trade for players with the intent of flipping them in the future because it doesn't always work out that easy. Trades in theory, you're making them all the time, but the reality is you're probably only making a handful of trades every single year. So if you're trying to buy somebody now with the intent of flipping them in a few months, chances are you're just going to get stuck with that player that you never wanted to begin with.
It's kind of like a salary cap draft, right? Where you want to bid up players you don't want, but if you get stuck with that bid, you got to be prepared to deal with this player on your team. Same thing of trading them with the intention of trading them. If you can't do it, you got to be prepared to have them on your team that year. All right, so Al Paul was chiming in on our Jalen Waddle discussion. He thinks that there's a possibility that Waddle could flip-flop Tyreek Hill in production as they both get older, which I think. And apparently Tyreek Hill's ready to hang it up here in a couple of years from what we saw this past week on that Kansas City Chiefs podcast that he was on. But you look at Waddle and Hill. I mean, there's probably a chance that eventually, I mean, we haven't seen it so far, that Waddle could be the 1A and Tyreek Hill becomes the 1B, or Waddle's the 1 and Tyreek Hill's the 2 in Miami.
It could happen. I just don't think it's going to happen this year. Probably
Right.
won't happen next year either. So, I mean, it could certainly happen down the road. And I think that's kind of what you're hoping for. But like I said, the scary thing is typically dominant players maintain dominant target shares regardless of who the team competition is. And this was a hyper funneled offense. Almost 50% of the targets went to either Tyreek Hill or Jalen Waddle. It just so happened that over 30% of that was going Tyreek Hill's way. So it could happen. The other thing I'll say about Tyreek Hill, though, is his play style. He's not an extremely physical player. He's not catching passes across the middle of the field and getting blasted. He's great at avoiding contact. So his style of play probably lends for him to have a pretty lengthy career. So I think that we still have another 2-3 years of Tyreek Hill being, putting up elite production, which could make it just that much more harder for Waddle to carve out a role for himself.
Yeah, it's one of those things where it's like he's probably blessed with the coverage for having Hill, but he's never going to have that dominant, huge target share as long as Hill is on that team. We are talking about Dave's article on footballguys.com, assessing the dynasty wide receiver landscape. We have talked a lot about your tiers, Dave. There's the elite wide receiver 1 tier, the fringe elite tier. There's the young and intriguing, the buy on the wrong side of 25, the risky rookie tier. And then, of course, the ever popular sitting atop the age curve wide receiver running back hybrids who require elite efficiency to be productive in fantasy, but are stuck on a team with intense touch competition and quarterback uncertainty tier. There is only one player on this tier. And I don't know if there's anybody out there, and maybe I might be using that term a little bit liberally, but I don't know if there anybody's out there that has a really good handle on what Deebo Samuel's value should be. Why is he so confounding for Dynasty? And how do we make sense of him if we want to target him or if we want to trade him in our Dynasty leagues?
Well, Deebo Samuel was a guy through his first few years in the league where you saw these flashes of potential, but he's never been a guy that had that screaming profile that, you need to invest in this guy because he's drawn a lot of targets. It was just, hey, Deebo Samuel's a really fun player, and Kyle Shanahan likes getting the ball in his hands. So if you go back prior to the 2021 season, Deebo Samuel was a guy that I had on more best ball rosters and more dynasty rosters than any other player. I was just enamored with him, but he was dirt cheap at the time. Then he had one season that was marked by insane efficiency. We're talking over 18 yards per catch, over 6 yards per carry, goal line work, and getting a touchdown on almost 12 or almost 11% of his touches. So that season was great. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it was a blast, but I think the move was to sell him immediately after that season ended, because the reality is that we've seen Deebo Samuel now for 4 years in the league. 3 of those 4 years, he has been a wide receiver 3/flex. And then he had 1 year where he was a dominant wide receiver 1, but you can't bet on that sort of efficiency. And I think that's what happened is people saw Deebo put it all together, stay healthy for 1 year, and said, well, this is just what he's going to do. He's going to have 18 yards per reception and 6 yards per carry, and he's going to score 12 touchdowns every single year. And the reality is there aren't many players that can maintain that type of efficiency. So for whatever reason now, the market hasn't really corrected yet, and he's still valued as a top 20, top 24 wide receiver, and I don't think that's where he should be. He's 27 years old now. He fell off the efficiency, hill that we expected last year, and now he's stuck on a team where we don't even know who the quarterback is going to be. It could be Brock Purdy, could be Trey Lance, could be Sam Darnold for all we know week 1. He's on a team where Christian McCaffrey showed up and took away all of his high-value touches. I mean, that's where the majority of Deebo's points came from. Now Christian McCaffrey is just usurped in there. He doesn't really have the skill set to win as a wide receiver 1 and get in 30% target shares. So he's losing out on passing down work to George Kittle and Brandon Ayuk. He's losing out on those valuable goal line touches to Christian McCaffrey. The fact that he's still valued as this top 20, top 24 guy is kind of crazy to me. If you can get that type of return for him, I think he's one of the biggest sells in Dynasty right now.
I have him on at least one Dynasty team. I'm going to spend the break sending out some Dynasty offers to see if I can get something in return for Deebo Samuel. You have sold me on this. Check out this article from Dave Kluge, footballguys.com. But we're not done talking Dynasty. Dave talked wax poetic on wide receivers here in this last segment. Let's talk about his thoughts on the running back landscape. We're going to talk more about McCaffrey. We're going to talk a little bit about Travis Etienne. We're going to talk a lot about Saquon Barkley, and as far as the tiers go in running backs as well, because I think, we all want to talk about rookies this time of year. It's equally or more important to figure out what you should be doing with these players right now before the NFL draft to ensure maximum success in your Dynasty leagues this upcoming season. He's Dave Kluge from footballguys.com, the Launchpad Podcast. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the HSFF Hour, and of course, the Road of His High Stakes Lowdown. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on the Better Sports Network. Hour 2 is coming up next.
Monday Night Rants with Edward Rouse on Better Sports Network.
Do you believe in the Madden curse? Do you think that's a real thing?
I did. Now, I don't think it's as big of a deal anymore, but it was a real thing for a solid 10, 15 years.
Yeah, it was Sean Alexander, LaDainian Tomlinson, Peyton Hillis.
LT was never on the cover. I know that.
Was he not? I thought he was one. Okay, well, you do know all the covers of everything.
Yeah, okay. So if you want, I could do this real quick. So Garrison Hurst is the first official Madden cover athlete, 1999. 2000, I believe they still put John Madden on the cover. And then 2001 is where it all started. So 2001, you have Eddie George. 2002, Dante Culpepper. 2003, Marshall Falk. 04, Michael Vick. 05, Ray Lewis, first defensive player on the cover.
Okay.
06, Donovan McNabb. 07, Sean Alexander.
Okay.
08, Vince Young. 09, Brett Favre.
Okay.
10 is a trick one because it's
no way you know.
And Larry Fitzgerald. 11, Drew Brees. 12, Peyton Hillis. 13, Calvin Johnson, I believe so.
You're right.
14.
No way you know all this.
14, also a trick question. I believe that's the Madden 25 cover, and it's Barry Sanders, unless you got it for the new consoles, in which case Adrian Peterson
oh my God.
was on the cover.
You're not cheating. You're not looking at...
Swear on my life. Swear on my life.
Okay, keep on going.
15, you have Richard Sherman.
Okay.
16, hold on. 16 is Odell Beckham.
Okay.
16. 17, now this is the one I get mixed up because 17 and 18 are back-to-back Patriots.
They are.
17, I think, is Gronk, and 18 is Brady.
You are correct.
19 is Antonio Brown.
Correct.
20, Patrick Mahomes.
Oh my goodness.
21, Lamar Jackson. 22, Brady Mahomes. 23, John Madden. But yeah, dude, I'm a cover nerd when it comes to this stuff.
We now know, but that was really impressive. I don't know how.
Thank you.
That's literally 29 of them or something like that. Wow, that is. You did not miss a single one, and you even got the special editions where they had 2 people on the covers.
Monday Night Rants on Better Sports Network. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
4 minutes after the top of the hour here on the Better Sports Network. I am Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour. The RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. My guest co-host this evening has already been crushing it. He has 56 more minutes of crushing to do, and he will do it. Dave Kluge from footballguys.com, at Dave Kluge on Twitter, the Launchpad host as well, as we are talking about a lot of Dynasty fantasy football stuff tonight, ladies and gentlemen. And I think that if you want to put this to good use, the best thing to do is go to myffpc.com, adopt the Dynasty Orphan team with the FFPC. Discounted teams available ranging from $77 to $2,500. Some of those teams, that's just the level of the entry. Some of those teams are discounted as low as $1. Myffpc.com is where to go for that. Myffpc.com, and check out the Dynasty startups we have there at the $100 level as well. We talked about, Dave, your assessing the wide receiver landscape. You also published an article. This is probably a little over a month ago, but I think a lot of this is still very fresh and applicable, most of it, if not all of it. The Dynasty running back landscape. So in reading this piece today, and I haven't read the whole thing yet, but I think one of the things that caught my eye is the statements and the idioms that you used at the top of this piece. Number 1, chaos is a ladder, cream rises to the top. What do these mean as far as the dynasty running back landscape goes right now?
So this, the idea for this article is actually kind of what sparked the entire series that I'm doing now with all the other positions as well, because I was getting so many questions from people every single day before free agency saying, what do I do with these running backs? You know, this guy, he can lose his job, and this guy could be a cap casualty. And basically what my stance was for the, as soon as the season ended in January and February, I said, I'm not talking about running backs at all because it's going to be a disaster and a fuster, you know what? And I just said, I don't want to touch anything to do with running backs. And then about 2 months went by and I said, what am I doing? This is my job. I have to do this. So I said, I have to sit down and figure out how exactly to value these guys. And I think that when you're looking at running backs, it is no secret that running backs are the most volatile types of players, the most volatile position you can have in Dynasty. I mean, you can have a guy that is picked up off your waiver wire that you can plug in and get RB1 output from. In the same vein, you could have a guy that's been a 5 straight year RB1 that just disappears and is useless overnight. Zeke Elliott. But anyway, these 2 idioms that you talk about, chaos is a ladder and cream rises to the top. This was before free agency. And this is when we were looking at a free agency class that was going to have Saquon Barkley, Josh Jacobs, Tony Pollard, Miles Sanders, David Montgomery, Davian Harris, Deonta Foreman, Rashad Penny, Alexander Madison. The list goes on and on and on and on. And basically what I said is the good players are going to find ways to find themselves in good position. And so far, it's still a little bit early in the offseason, but that's what we've been seeing so far. So chaos is a ladder. This is going to be a chaotic offseason, and it's going to make an opportunity for people to climb up. Eric, if you're not aware, that is a Game of Thrones. Littlefinger is the chaos is a ladder.
So I love Game of Thrones, and I've been watching the spinoff, obviously. I remember Littlefinger. I just don't remember Littlefinger saying it. And I think it's because he is such a character you always root against, that like anything that comes out of his mouth, I just immediately I can't trust anything that guy says,
Yeah.
But he's right. He's right about this. And that it's totally true. I love that show. It's fantastic. Went off the air too soon, but I get why people were upset at the ending. You probably didn't like the ending of that, right? Of Game of Thrones?
When I watched it live, I actually did. I wasn't one of the people that was like complaining about it all over social media. My wife and I watched it live and we said, hey, this is pretty good. And then 2020, pandemic, all that,
Yeah.
We're cooped up in our house. We said, hey, let's watch Game of Thrones. And watching the entire show front to back, like starting season 1 and watching it through the end, that's when you notice there is a stark difference in the final 2 seasons. And it was almost unwatchable the second time around. So watching it at the time, it's fun. You're invested. Watching 1 hour every single week, I didn't have a problem with it. But upon rewatch, it was pretty bad.
What's funny is, and I don't maybe maybe Game of Thrones. I don't want to turn this into the Game of Thrones show, but I will say this: Game of Thrones could be a prisoner of its own success, right? Because it became so popular, and then we had the buildup, right? What's going to happen with the Night King? What's going to happen with Clegane Bowl? Oh my God, Clegane Bowl!
Yep.
Like that was like trending on Twitter for forever. Wanting to see the two Cleganes like battle and go at it. What's going to happen with Jon Snow? What's going to happen with the Lannisters and everything that's going on there? What about these other? And like I think it's kind of like Seinfeld when that went off the air, and I'm still a huge Seinfeld fan, but I remember watching that. It's like because it was so successful, and social media wasn't a thing back then, but it was a thing with Game of Thrones, and I think because it was so successful. There was no way for it to live up to because we all had this image in our head of what it should be, right? And I think this applies to Dynasty fantasy football as well. When we get into the danger of valuing players at their ceilings, right? We all have this image of what we think what should happen, what it should be, and very oftentimes we are let down by that, and it's sometimes because of the flashes we see. From players on the field, like, oh my goodness, look what that guy does. Like this is the time to buy on him. Oh my goodness, Game of Thrones, look what they're setting up here. This is going to be an unbelievable ending to the show. And very oftentimes when we have high expectations, we're often let down. And
I still think the best thing, the scriptwriter should have just hung out on Reddit and Twitter and looked at all the fan theories and just used that to write the script. Because I feel like Reddit wrote a better ending to the show than the scriptwriters did.
Yes, totally. I totally agree with that. 100%. And very often Reddit, like God bless them. Reddit does get a lot of stuff right. And the Reddit users, they get a lot of stuff I happen to agree with, but I would say still the majority of it is like, I got to get off this stuff, but it's harming me, my mental health to try to read what these people are writing. And it's not good. It's not good for anyone. Anyway, getting back to Dynasty fantasy football, you mentioned age and talent in regards to wide receivers. Does that same thing apply to running backs this time of year where you're just looking at how old the guy is and how talented he is and everything else is kind of on the wayside because it is such a volatile position?
This time of year, absolutely. And when I wrote this article pre-free agency, even more so. And again, as we get closer to week 1, that's when you can start looking at depth charts and doing camp reports and, shout out football guys. We do an awesome job of putting together the training camp reports and, trying to project and do depth charts and all that. But at this time of year, you can't project anything. So, I mean, those are really the two things that we can base off of. If you're trying to look at a depth chart in February and say, well, I expect this guy to get 250 touches, so I want him on my team, you're setting yourself up for failure, man. That's not how you can play this in Dynasty. So the things are, talented players end up in good situations. And young players are the ones that are going to find easier paths to success. So those are really the only two things that I'm evaluating right now, because I don't think there was a single guy that was safe in free agency this year. I mean, we see crazy things happen every single year. I make this joke all the time. The one thing missing from everybody's process is the almost absolute certainty that NFL teams are going to do stupid things. It happens every single year, and we never expect it. So right now, people are saying, well, Christian McCaffrey is safe, Saquon Barkley is safe, Josh Jacobs is safe. And relative to other running backs, that might be true. But it wouldn't surprise me one bit if somehow Derrick Henry is, getting shopped on the trade market and San Francisco says, why not? We're going all in. Let's bring Derrick Henry in. And then all of a sudden, Derrick Henry is worthless and Christian McCaffrey is worthless. Crazy things happen every single year. Now, I'm not projecting or predicting that that's going to happen, but I'm just saying that is the type of thing that does happen every single year that leaves us scratching our heads wondering why it happened. So you can't project anything this year. All you can do is look at the two things that we have, which are young players that are talented, end up in good situations. Those are the guys you want to bet on.
Sign me up for the Trey Lance, Christian McCaffrey, Derrick Henry backfield. I'd love to see it with Kyle Shanahan as a coach. Man, that's must see TV. I think you're right. I mean, I think in fantasy football, just year round, we're always working with incomplete information, and it doesn't get more incomplete than it does right now. We talk about, the first 2, maybe even 3 waves of free agency are done right now. We haven't hit the NFL draft. There's players out there that will be in backfields and will be in wide receiver rooms and will be catching passes as tight ends this year that are still free agents that NFL teams want to see what happens in the draft first. And then those teams, those players come in, not necessarily to become difference makers, but they do gum up the works for the other players that are already there. So we're it's like a constant process, right? And we're sort of now in the we're just waiting to see what happens in the NFL draft so we can start trying to flesh these things out going
And
forward.
I already see people, burning down Twitter, taking victory laps that,
Yeah.
Tyler Algier made it, out of free. There's still a draft and there are still June 1st cap casualties, which I think that's going to hit people a lot harder than people realize. I mean, we already hear about Zeke getting cut. Fournette was already cut, but Dalvin Cook, Joe Mixon, Derrick Henry, Chase Edmonds, Gus Edwards, Nyheim Hines. There's still a lot of players that can end up getting cut from teams and muddying up other backfields.
Totally. I 100% with you on that. I'm here for it. I love the chaos. When you let's talk about your tiers here. Your blue chip tier made up of 4 running backs. Okay. You're looking at Breece Hall, which obviously makes sense. I mean, that dude would have been the 101 redraft pick this year if he wouldn't have torn his ACL. Jonathan Taylor obviously was the de facto and consensus #1 pick last year. Kenneth Walker, who obviously came on like gangbusters at the second half of the 2022 season. But I think Travis Etienne has been a little bit polarizing in the high stakes landscape. People are wondering, is this guy, closer to Austin, at like peak Austin Eckler and his prime, or is he going to be more like DeAndre Swift, where they're never going to allow him to be the type of running back that can be the #1 overall running back in any given fantasy season? You include him in your blue chips. I want to get your process on why you think ETN is in the same dynasty neighborhood as those other 3 running backs.
So, I talk about rushing yards over expectation per attempt often. That's one of my favorite metrics to talk about when, trying to evaluate the talent of a running back. And Travis Etienne smashed this year. And that was realistically, I mean, sure, technically it was year 2, but you can kind of look at this as Travis Etienne's rookie season. He didn't play at all his rookie year. So this is his first time playing. He's coming off of an injured foot. I was expecting a slow start for him, and there was. It took him a little bit of time to ramp up with James Robinson. But once he was fully up to speed, he looked like a dominant running back. And the one thing that was missing from his game this year was his lack of pass catching, which is really kind of what he made a career out of in college, was catching these check down passes from Trevor Lawrence. So I feel like we haven't even seen him hit his full potential yet. It seemed like Doug Peterson was keeping him on a leash last year. I don't think the team really had any plans of making the playoffs, and then they unexpectedly did, and Trevor Lawrence took that huge step forward. But I think that we only see him get better from here. He's already displayed great abilities as a rusher, which was kind of the question mark with him coming out of the league. And now we haven't seen him in a pass catching role yet. I think that we can see both of those things happen in the future because he profiled as a great pass catcher in college. The question marks were about his rushing abilities, and he has since checked off that box as an elite rusher.
Is he a type of guy or the type of player when we talk about dodging bullets in the NFL draft? Is he the type of player that you think still has to make it through? I mean, he's got Jermichael Hasty behind him, and Dearness Johnson, obviously. But besides that, there's not a whole lot there. Are you necessarily concerned about the Jaguars adding a day 2 running back that would sort of muck things up for Travis Etienne, at least for 2023?
Yeah, it certainly could happen. And I mean, Doug Peterson has shown us year after year that he does like to have a stable of running backs. But again, we're kind of looking at the long term here. And I think that long term, Travis Etienne has showed us that he could be a very productive NFL running back. So even if they do end up drafting somebody, situations change often. And the 2 things that I'm looking at, age and talent, are both on the side of Travis Etienne. So, I mean, it would obviously ding him a little bit. Now that I'm looking back at this article, a month later, I think the change that I would have made, I didn't include any rookies in here. And what I probably would do now if I'm looking at this is put Breece Hall, Jonathan Taylor, and Bijan Robinson in the blue chip tier. And then I would have a micro tier that is just Travis Etienne and Kenneth Walker, because they both looked great last year. But I think that they're probably a half tier behind these other guys that we're talking about.
In our chat tonight, we talk about Dynasty Fantasy Football. One of the things that I feel like I've talked with, and I've talked with Jordan about this, Chad Parsons, another great Dynasty player we've had on the show, Shane Hallam, the list goes on and on. I feel like, and this is more, I guess, more for novice or beginning Dynasty Fantasy Football players, is you tend to look at things from a long-term point of view. But what a lot of these analysts will tell you is you need to look at it in smaller windows because, like you said, Dave, things change so much. But I hear you talking about long-term quite a bit on the show tonight. And I'm almost wondering if, and maybe you could speak to this better than I could, do you feel like you have a longer-term dynasty window than a lot of your other peers out there that might look at things from a shorter perspective?
I do, yeah. I take a much much longer term approach than a lot of other people. But at the same time, something that I really try to do is get guys that are a little bit older. So I'm not trying to just accrue value. Where a lot of times, these guys that are taking the short term approach are just playing on a 2 to 3 year window. I'm playing on a long term window, but I also try to find value in veterans. So that's why my favorite tier when we were talking, I'll go back to the wide receivers, but my favorite tier in there was the buy on the wrong side of 25 because everybody's so excited about getting that dynasty team. I call them the Twitter dynasty teams, the one that probably isn't going to finish above 500, but man, you share that screenshot on Twitter and people are going to gush over it, when the reality is I like the guys that are 25, 26, 27 years old and still are going to have plenty of productive years ahead of them. But I feel like some people get so enamored with the short-term window that they start looking at these super old vets. I try to find that middle ground where I want younger guys, but I still want guys that are going to be productive for the next 4 or 5 years.
I think I'm trying to, so buy on the wrong side of 25. The players we didn't talk about, and I won't, dwell on this too long. Ayuk, DJ Moore, we talked about Pittman in Indianapolis. Obviously, we're going to talk about Chris Godwin coming up in the final segment. You already talked about Marquise Brown, Deontay Johnson, McLaurin, and Christian Kirk are in there as well. Have you noticed yourself buying maybe one or two of those guys more than some of the other ones in that tier so far this season, or are they about the same for you?
For me, it's Chris Godwin. I can't understand why. It seems like this is like the third straight offseason where Chris Godwin has been a buy. I mean, I get the one offseason where he was coming off a torn ACL, but this guy's been a target hog every single year he's been in the league. And last year, I was getting him in the 6th round of drafts, and this year I'm getting him in the 8th round of drafts. For whatever reason, people just like expect the bottom to fall out under him. They think that he's this house of cards that isn't going to be able to maintain his production. So Chris Godwin is a guy that I can't get enough of. And then Brandon Ayuk is the other one because, we talked earlier about target share and those metrics. Brandon Ayuk, the only thing keeping him from, extreme production is the fact that he's on a very loaded offense where he struggles to carve that out. But I think he's the type of guy where if he could change scenery and end up in a team, we could see something much like Christian Kirk, where Christian Kirk went to Jacksonville and suddenly exploded as the team's wide receiver one. I think Brandon Ayuk has that type of talent where if he got traded to a team that didn't have George Kittle, Deebo Samuel, and Christian McCaffrey, he could solidify himself as a 130, 140 type target type of guy.
What about as long as we're talking about Godwin, you think Mike Evans is a little bit overvalued in Dynasty right now? Because I think if you believe this much in Chris Godwin, not knowing the quarterback situation in Tampa, knowing that Mike Evans isn't a 22-year-old man anymore, do you think he's being a little bit overvalued?
Yeah, I think Michael Evans has been overvalued for the last few years. I mean, I didn't really want anything to do with him last year. There was a point last year, I don't know where he was at in FFPC ADP, but on Underdog, he creeped into the 1st round at one point. Like Mike Evans was going 11th overall, and everyone was saying Godwin coming off the ACL, but Mike Evans has never really been that ceiling guy. I mean, I feel like at this point he's fighting so hard to get to 1,000 yards every single season just to keep it alive. He had the one season where he was like 1,001 yards. I think he literally eclipsed it by 1 yard. And for him, that's what you're looking at with Mike Evans. He's never going to be that 1,300, 1,400, 1,500 yard guy. He's going to give you 1,000 yards and 6 touchdowns every single season. And people are still valuing him as a wide receiver one. We saw last year the efficiency fell off. He's never been an elite target earner. He consistently floats between like 15 and 18%. And you're just banking on him to score big touchdowns every single week. And when those touchdowns don't hit, it burns you. And when they do, it's great. I got my butt spanked by JJ Zacharyson in the finals of Sleeper Bowl last year because that's when Mike Evans finally decided to do his thing in the same week that Justin Jefferson did absolutely nothing. At the end of the day, it's a fluky game that we play, but long-term, Mike Evans isn't a guy that I want to invest in.
JJ was on the show last week. I'm happy to tell you he did not gloat over that, Dave. He did not talk about that at all.
He going into the matchup, he was already congratulating me. He pulled the reverse jinx to a T. Just, hey man, your team is so loaded here. I don't have a chance. I don't even know how I ended up in this position. And then I get hit with like a 52-point game from Mike Evans.
I almost wonder if like Evans is getting to that point where, we was talking about these spike week guys. I always go back to Devery Henderson was like the ultimate best ball guy, right? Because this is a guy that you could never trust to put in your starting lineup, but you draft him in best ball because you knew he's going to have these weeks where it was like 4 catches for 140 yards and 2 touchdowns, right? And I almost think if Evans is actually closer to that type of player rather than the alpha wide receiver one at this point, and people are slow to react to that. And it might be the time to sell on Mike Evans, or maybe, as to your point, maybe the time to sell Mike Evans in your dynasty leagues was last year and 2 years ago. Yeah.
Devery Henderson, man, what a pull.
Devery Henderson, huh? How about that? Yeah. It's one of those things where it's like every time that like the new Devery Henderson comes up every year, I always reference Devery Henderson still. So
2 years ago, Tyler Lockett was Devery Henderson.
Yeah, exactly. Perfect example. Getting back to running backs. So your second contract bell cows here. I get McCaffrey, I get Barkley. I look at Josh Jacobs, and he's another polarizing player we're discussing, because there's going to be a lot of people out there saying, look, this guy was a disappointment most of his career in Las Vegas, except for the last year when he just absolutely went ham, led the league in rushing, had all these catches. Now you look at it for Dynasty Fantasy Football. He's back with Vegas, but does he deserve to be on that second tier of Dynasty Fantasy Football, which is where you have him right now? There's going to be some people out there that say that he shouldn't be up there, but you think he should be. Why?
I mean, he just turned 25 2 months ago. He is way younger than I think people realize, and this happens often. And, I kind of make the same argument for Josh Jacobs that I do with DK Metcalf. This guy got drafted so young. He was so highly touted. Everybody thought that he was going to be the next big thing, and he never really developed into that guy. Josh Jacobs was never the guy that we thought he'd be when he was drafted. DK Metcalf was never the guy we thought he'd be while he was drafted. And because he never had that imminent breakout of being like the best player in fantasy sports, everybody just kind of soured on him a little bit. And I think because of that, it opened up a buy window. But really, when you're looking at Josh Jacobs, you're looking at a guy that's 25 years old and coming off, 340 touches last year, or 340 rushes. I mean, Josh McDaniels feeds this guy, and now he's going into a slightly different offense with a new quarterback, but it's still going to be Josh McDaniels. It's still on a 1-year deal, which is basically how Josh McDaniels inherited him last year. So worst case scenario is we're looking at one more season where he's going to get fed 300 to 350 touches this year. And I think the one thing that a lot of people don't realize about Josh Jacobs is because the fantasy production hasn't been there, he's a great target earner. He's had over 60 targets in back-to-back seasons. This is one of my favorite stats to drop. He has over 200 career targets and has never scored a receiving touchdown. So I feel like even last year, after he had his huge breakout, 1,600 whatever rushing yards, he still left some meat on the bone. So I think that Josh Jacobs is one of those guys who is much better than his production has led us to believe. Last year, we got a little taste of it, and it still wasn't his full ceiling.
Yeah, that's what the crazy thing is we think he had this career year last year. He could have an even bigger year, maybe in 2023 or even 2024. So in dynasty leagues, that's why you have him on that second tier. You have a third tier in this, Dave. Young and talented, and then there's some buts with these guys. Now I'm going to read them off for the viewers out there. DeAndre Swift, Javonte Williams, Najee Harris, J.K. Dobbins, Tony Pollard, and Ramondre Stevenson. Is there one player among those 6 running backs that you are more likely to buy right now in your dynasty leagues? And conversely, is there one player in those 6 that you would be looking to move on from and get what you can for him right now?
Yeah, buying whichever one's the cheapest, selling whichever one's the most expensive.
So they don't separate a whole lot. There's not a whole lot of separation for you here.
Yeah, I mean, I was a little tongue in cheek there, but I'll give you the real answer is the guy that I'm trying to buy right now is J.K. Dobbins, and he probably is the cheapest of this bunch. But J.K. Dobbins, man, talk about just a forgotten guy. In that 2022 class with Jonathan Taylor and DeAndre Swift and Cam Akers and Clyde Edwards-Helaire, J.K. Dobbins was just the guy that kind of got swept underneath the rug. And I get it. He missed an entire year with an injury, and then last year he was not himself. But the one thing that really jumps out to me is that when we saw him in a rookie, when he had that explosion, down the stretch, I think it was week 13 or week 14, whatever it was. It was a very short-lived end of the season. Or, I'm sorry, it was week 11 onward, because I remember he had 7 touchdowns in 6 games. And during that stretch where he was averaging about 90 yards per game, he was only seeing 13 touches per game. So he was doing, really exciting things, scoring a ton of fantasy points on a very, very small, touch total. And then we didn't see him at all in 2021. Last year, he came back, got injured again, didn't look like himself. But down the stretch last year, at the end of the year, when he still wasn't himself, I mean, you saw his leg was stiff. I'm sure you saw that breakaway run he had where he got caught up from behind. he was clearly not himself. And he was averaging 14.5 touches per game over that stretch. So even while he was still injured and clearly not himself, the coaching staff was still giving him a lot of touches. I think that he's such an explosive player. He's still very young, 24 years old. And it's going to take him time to get back from that knee injury. But by the time week 1 rolls around this year, he's going to be over 2 years removed from the injury. I just still have faith that he's going to be able, even if he doesn't return completely to his pre-injury form, I think that he just has so much explosiveness in his game that he's got that potential to be one of those really, really high-profile running backs. The one last thing I'll say about J.K. Dobbins is that in the Greg Roman offense, targets are never distributed to running backs. He didn't get any looks out of the backfield at all. Todd Monken likes to throw to running backs, and J.K. Dobbins showed in college that he could be a very good pass catcher. So I think now we can actually see his ceiling get raised a little bit in the Todd Monken offense where he can get involved in the passing game as well.
As long as we're talking Ravens, you have the Lamar Jackson jersey behind you. Let's talk about Lamar Jackson here for a second. This is a player, Dave, that I have been waiting. I feel like every week I talk about him, I keep waiting for him to drop to quarterback 8 in the FFPC Never Too Early ADP. And he has been so close for like 3 weeks, but Trevor Lawrence, for whatever reason, just can't seem to overtake him. So he's still quarterback 7. He's still going in the mid-5th round. There's some uncertainty in drafting Lamar Jackson right now. But again, with the Never Too Early tournament, you got to beat out thousands of other teams. This is the type of player you want to be in business with, right?
Yeah, I mean, Lamar Jackson, there's a reason I got his jersey here. He won me a lot of money in 2019. I that was when you could still get him in the 10th, 12th round, towards the end of your draft. But this year is tough, and it really wouldn't surprise me if he holds out. So I get where you're coming from, that, if you want to take down a big tournament, you need to take that risk. But if I'm a volume drafter, I'm okay having some exposure to Lamar Jackson. But like if I'm doing a dynasty startup right now, or if I'm doing, just one entry into a big tournament, I'm a little bit scared off at the idea that he might not be playing in 2023.
Yeah, it's weird to think about. But I never thought Le'Veon Bell would sit out an entire season, and until it happened. And now there's a precedent, and we'll see what happens going forward with Lamar Jackson. Last thing I want to ask you about with the running backs, you have a wrong side of the age curve, okay? As far as the running backs go. Now, the wrong side of the age curve is 3 players. It's Austin Eckler, it's Nick Chubb, and it's Derrick Henry. How risky is it truly to be trading for any of these 3 players right now? We know they could fall off the cliff. I don't know how likely it is that it happens this year, but how truly risky is it to deal and get one of these guys back in return on your dynasty squads?
Well, I think Nick Chubb is probably the safest, because you know that he's at least going to be in Cleveland for the next couple of years, and we know that offense likes to give him the ball, and he's the youngest of the bunch as well. But man, Austin Eckler and Derrick Henry, they're kryptonite for me right now. I don't want anything to do with either of these guys. Looking at Austin Eckler, I mean, great player, but he has benefited so much from being in that offense. I don't know if he's going to end up in another team where he's going to be seeing 8 to 10 targets every single game, and goal line work, and early down work. And I mean, he just is in a perfect situation right now where he's getting peppered with every high value touch that you can possibly imagine. And ever since Melvin Gordon's been out of the picture, there's been very little target competition. I mean, Justin Jackson and Joshua Kelly, it's kind of been the perfect storm for Austin Eckler to get all these high-value touches. Derrick Henry is kind of in the same situation. If Derrick Henry ends up a cap casualty and gets cut, there's no other team that's going to bring Derrick Henry in and feed him 300 touches every single game. So those are both guys that really, really scare me. Very talented players, but where they're at this point in their career, they're a cut away from just cratering in value and production.
Yeah, it's one of those things, like, because they're on your tier 4, you'd like to think you could get a pretty good deal on these guys, and then obviously that lessens the risk if you're giving up less for them. But at the same time, they're still big names, they're still producing, and it's tough to get those guys at a discount. So maybe you're better off, as you said, if Dave Kluge is kryptonite, or if Dave Kluge is Superman, the Eckler and Henry should be your kryptonite as well. In regards to this, because I think I'm going to stay away from those players. It's just too risky at this point, especially when you have to consider what you have to give up to get them. Okay, one final segment to go. You have your rankings out at footballguys.com. I have picked through them with a fine-tooth comb, or at least glanced at them. Glancing that's probably more accurate, is just glancing at them. But some of them did stand out to me. Players like Aaron Jones, players like Miles Sanders, A.J. Brown, Jalen Hurts. We're going to talk about all those players and more. I want to get your thoughts on drafting and ranking rookies in your best ball rankings as well. I want to get to know your process in Dynasty. We only have less than a half hour to do it. I don't know how much we're going to get to. We're going to do our best to get to all of it. Dave Kluge from Football Guys, Eric Balkman from the FFPC. This is the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Don't go anywhere. We'll be right back on the Better Sports Network.
Better Sports Network. Collectible moments.
Everybody up here at U.S. Cellular. Sox 5 runs, 6 hits. The 2-1 to Bartlett. Swing shot to short. Ramirez has it, throws. Burley picks the perfect game. His second no-hitter. People going crazy here at U.S. Cellular. He's mobbed by his teammates. A perfecto.
Now there's a steal by Bird. Underneath the DJ, lays it in. Right out, 1 second left. What a play by Bird. Bird stole the impounding pass. Laid it up to DJ. DJ laid it up at him. And Boston has a 1-point lead with 1 second left.
Out of the I formation on first down. Peterson to carry, looking for running room on the right side, has it to the 25, across the 30, across the 35, and out of bounds at the 40-yard line. Adrian Peterson has just gone over 2,000 yards for the season, the 7th man in NFL history to cross the 2,000-yard mark.
Well, a thundering ovation for number 66, Mario Lemieux.
Just the emotion I'm sure Mario is feeling in this place. You don't appreciate something until it's gone, and it's so great to have Mario back.
Yager turns around. Over to Lemieux. Mario Lemieux, his first goal in his comeback here tonight at the Mellon Arena. And the Penguins lead 3-0, and he is smiling like a butcher's dog. Mario Lemieux.
Oh, the band is out on the field. He's going to go into the end zone. The Bears have scored, but the Bands are out on the field.
Pearson moves in front of the STP Dodge. Petty comes back to the inside. They almost touch as they move down low in the banking. They're going to be side by side as they exit the bank and head for the finish line.
Richard Petty goes back in front. They both spin. They're in the wall. Petty is sliding, slamming into the wall. He's coming down toward the finish line. Will he make it? Pearson is still running. The winner is car number 21. An amazing finish. Richard Petty's car demolished in the front end, as well as car number 21. An unbelievable finish, a terrible crash. David Pearson has won the Daytona 500. Leitner catches, comes down, dribbles, shoots, scores! Christian Leitner has hit the bucket at the buzzer! Pitched by Downey, swinging, there's a drive into left center field. That ball is gonna be out of here. It's gone. It's 7-15. There's a new home run champion of all time, and it's Henry Aaron.
The most valuable player is Magic Johnson. 42 points, 15 rebounds, and 7 assists. He starts at center, plays forward and guard, and leads the Los Angeles Lakers to a world championship 123-107 over Philadelphia.
Whether you collect sports memorabilia, fantasy championships, or winning bet slips, talk about it on Better Sports Network. It's the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show on Better Sports Network.
$23 minutes and change here to go on the High Stakes Fantasy Football Show. Hey, thanks for hanging out with us on a Thursday night. Remember, this is Thursday night is fantasy football night here on the Better Sports Network. It's a great time to be a fantasy football player. 6 p.m. Eastern, you saw Quick Outs Fantasy Football with Andrew Cooper and John and Pemba. 7 o'clock, you get me. You get Dave Kluge from Football Guys on this week as well. And then coming up at the top of the hour, Dynasty Nerds with Garrett Price is coming up. NFL free agency and trades, NFL draft plus Dynasty Leagues, best ball strategy. We're going through a lot of that tonight. Hear the best fantasy football analysts on bettersports.com, the Better Sports Network app, and streaming everywhere on social media at Better Network. Dave Kluge on Twitter at Dave Kluge, footballguys.com. Let's talk about your rankings. And I guess now there's plenty of expert rankings at Football Guys. I use them all the time. But I wanted to look at how you were in relation to your colleagues and which guys that you maybe had a little bit higher, which guys that you maybe had a little bit lower than everybody else. So let's talk about Breece Hall. I know we talked about him from a dynasty perspective. How concerned are you about, again, just redraft for this portion of the program? How concerned are you about him coming off this ACL tear to be, and let me bring this up too, as I ask you this question. Right now in the Never Too Early FFPC Best Ball Tournament, Breece Hall is currently going at running back 9, Dave, at the 211. The ACL tear. Let's talk about it and how concerned you are with it.
I'm actually just realizing right now that I am below consensus on Breece Hall compared to the rest of the guys on staff. I thought that I was pretty confident in him, but it looks like everybody else on staff is even more confident in him. I will also say I didn't know you were going to be picking through these with a fine-tooth comb. I would have updated them beforehand.
I didn't.
They're a couple weeks old, and it's tough, man. Doing rankings this time of year, redraft rankings, is really, really, really hard because so many things that we, you have to guess right now more than anything else. So I'm kind of shocked to see that the rest of my staff has him at 9th overall, but I like to see the faith that everybody else has in him. I think that he's going to bounce back just fine too. If he wasn't coming off the ACL tear, he'd probably be my RB1 this year. But that ACL obviously is a little bit concerning. Data shows us that a guy in year one coming off the ACL tear usually does have some sort of a setback, unless you are Adrian Peterson. He seems to be the outlier there. The one thing that I will say, though, is hearing from, doctors and physical therapists and everybody that studies this sort of stuff, it does seem like he's progressing well. It was supposedly a pretty clean tear. We've got the word from Robert Saleh last week that he is looking good. So again, I haven't updated these in the last couple of weeks, but definitely going to be moving him up a little bit after that news. We talked about it earlier, where I think when we were kind of going through this or this guy talking about Saquon Barkley, Breece Hall falls in as my RB7 right now. So behind some of the big names, behind Barkley, behind Bijan, but still comfortable taking him in the mid to early second round.
We talked about, I think Jordan McNamara actually said this on his show as far as Dynasty goes, just avoid 49ers running backs because it's so hit or miss. And I think for many years, and to a certain extent, it's still kind of true. I heard from, I talk to high stakes fantasy football players all the time, and they always said, avoid the Patriots running backs. Ramondre Stevenson actually kind of bucked that trend a little bit last year to the point where he is now going as running back 13 in the Never Too Early FFPC Best Ball Tournament at the 310. However, Patriots still do have some guys behind them, and they certainly could look at drafting another running back. Is it just inevitable that somehow Stevenson is not going to be a wise fantasy investment, drafting right now and getting him at the end of the third round? Is that too high of a price to pay, Dave?
Yeah, and this is one of my biggest flag plants, compared to the rest of the guys on staff. I am way below Ramondre Stevenson for that exact reason. And if he makes it through the draft unscathed, I will be forced to move him up in my rankings. But I don't think that we're going to see him just land into this role where he's going to see 250, 300 touches. And I think that's what people are expecting. That has never been the Bill Belichick way. I think the reason last year that he ended up with a lot of the volume is because they had big plans for Damian Harris. When both of these guys were on the field over the last 2 years, Damian Harris got the majority of the snaps and the majority of the touches. Damian Harris hasn't been able to stay healthy for the last couple of years, which opened up an opportunity for Ramondre Stevenson. But I think that Pierre Strong is going to take a lot of that pass catching work. Kevin Harris is a guy that I think that we can look out for to take away some of the goal line and rushing opportunities. But I think the biggest thing is that they end up spending their first or their second round pick on a running back. Even with Ramondre Stevenson there, they've tipped their hat that they're interested in adding to that backfield. Right now, they're trying to put as many weapons around, whether it's going to be Mac Jones or Bailey Zappi. I don't even know at this point, but they're trying to bring as many weapons in as they can. So where are they picking? I think 14 is where they're picking in the draft. If Bijan is there, it wouldn't surprise me one bit if they end up going with Bijan. And then in the second round, if they're able to get Gibbs, that wouldn't surprise me either. So Ramondre Stevenson is a very talented back, but I just don't trust Bill Belichick enough to take him in the second round.
One of the things, I've been playing fantasy football now for almost 30 years. And one of the things I noticed when the internet became a thing and there's fantasy pundits and even talking to high stakes players over the last, 12 years or whatever. One of the things that I struggled with early on, Dave, was I would read something or listen to something. And if I didn't get confirmation bias, like if I wasn't in my own echo chamber, I immediately dismissed it. They don't know what they're talking about. That's totally wrong. I've learned over the last 5 or 6 years to have a much more open mind when it comes to stuff like this. Okay, well, what are they seeing that I'm not? What is different from their viewpoint and looking at this player or this situation that I just can't see from where I'm at? Mm-hmm. And this is going to lead me into Aaron Jones, because I feel like Aaron Jones, Jordan Love, or Aaron Rodgers, I think this guy is a stud. I think he's going to perform. I would say on average, the majority of high stakes players are kind of with you on this, and that you're a little bit down on Aaron Jones. He is going in the 5th round now, early 5th round, granted, of the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament, running back 15. Why are you down on Aaron Jones? Maybe I'm too close to the situation. I just got to take a step back and get another viewpoint on this. Why are you down on Aaron Jones in 2023?
Really, it just comes down to my lack of faith in Jordan Love more than anything else. I think we already talked. I mean, we talked about it in the first segment of this show a couple hours ago, where I don't think either of us expect Aaron Rodgers to be back, and Aaron Rodgers was able to lead a hyper efficient offense. So what we're betting on right now is that this offense is going to maintain its pace with Aaron Jones, and there's just some red flags there with Jordan Love. It could happen where he can take the step forward and be a great quarterback, but I'm just not banking on him being at Aaron Rodgers level and supporting that type of offense. And then you look at Aaron Jones, now 28 years old. He's getting to that age when we see guys start to step back a little bit. And last year, he, actually, I believe I'd have to double check, but I think he saw a career high in touches last year,
That's correct.
Which was kind of surprising at that age. I just. I will be completely honest with you. This one is kind of rooted in my gut. I just have an uneasy feeling about the Packers and Aaron Jones as a whole. I might need to reevaluate this one a little bit. He's kind of off my draft board right now at his current ADP. But again, a lot of it comes down to how I expect Jordan Love to play, and I'm just not expecting that much from Love.
Yeah, I mean, reevaluation is important, but it's not. To my point earlier, you're not on an island on this. There's plenty of people who are with you on this as well. And that's why I say, look, maybe I'm missing something, or maybe I'm just drafting Aaron Jones in way too many spots this year. That could be too. I've done that before.
I love Aaron Jones. I mean, last year I was beating the drum for him. I think I hit him as my RB4 or RB5. Didn't live up to that. Had to deal with some injuries, but now he's just at that point. Once a running back turns 28, I sour on him pretty quickly because I've been burned time and time again drafting a veteran running back who has had years and years of productivity. And once they hit that 28 age, things can fall out quickly. And I've been hurt for the last 2 years fading Derrick Henry for that exact reason. And maybe it finally, I'm finally right fading Derrick Henry this year. But even in redraft, I get nervous about drafting those older guys.
In about 3 weeks, Miles Sanders will not turn 28, but he will turn 26. Okay. Miles Sanders, is he a guy you're staying away from this year as well?
Again, I guess so. I haven't really looked at anybody else's rankings yet, but I'm seeing that I'm a little bit lower on Miles Sanders as well. Everybody I think has gone a little bit overboard with the Deuce Staley narrative because when Deuce Staley was coaching Miles Sanders, he had him in a committee. He wasn't feeding the guy 300 touches a season, and I don't know why people expect that he's going to now because he went out to get him. But Deuce Staley, he implemented a committee when he was in Philadelphia, implemented a committee when he was in Detroit, and I'm just not sure that we see him as in a bell cow role here in Carolina.
Let's shift away from the running backs here. I want to move on and talk at least about one receiver and actually a couple of Eagles here back to back. AJ Brown, I look at where you have him ranked. I think you had him 6th overall. I could be wrong on this, but I know it was quite a bit higher than your colleagues at Football Guys. He had his breakout last year. I mean, we should be on AJ Brown right now, and yet it doesn't seem like we totally are as a fantasy industry yet. And fantasy football players, high stakes ones, in the Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. AJ Brown right now, as I look at his ADP, he's wide receiver 7. You can get him at that 1-2 turn. Is that still too low?
Yeah, I mean, I'm taking him, like you said, 6 off the board in PPR leagues. I don't know if those are full PPR ADP.
Full PPR, yes.
Yeah, but I mean, the guy's a target hog. He's hyper efficient. He's on a great offense. I don't know what there is not to love about AJ Brown. I mean, we've seen years where he displayed the strong metrics to us that we want to see. Finally put it all together last year. I believe he's my wide receiver 3 or 4, but I think the big thing with my rankings is that I don't have a lot of running backs high. So while AJ Brown is, my 6th guy off the board, he's, I still have Justin Jefferson, Cooper Kupp, and Jamar Chase ahead of him, but the only non-wide receivers I'm taking ahead of AJ Brown are Travis Kelce and Christian McCaffrey. So I think that's the big thing is just how I rank players. I'm much more apt to take wide receivers earlier. So most people are probably taking Jonathan Taylor and Austin Eckler ahead of AJ Brown, and I prefer AJ Brown to both of them.
Ranking philosophy question. Do you have more wide receivers ranked higher than running backs because of the time of year or because of the volatility of the position or a little bit of both?
A little bit of both. And yeah, once we start getting into training camps, I think Austin Eckler is the one right now that I can't understand why he's getting drafted ahead of some of these big name wide receivers because we don't know where he's going to be playing or if he's going to be playing. So, if Austin Eckler is still on the Chargers and they don't add another running back, I'll probably move Austin Eckler up. But right now, as is, I'd prefer quite a few wide receivers to Eckler.
Jalen Hurts is quarterback 3 in the Never Too Early tournament right now. He's going at the 301. Dave, this is a tournament, not super flex. This is a single quarterback league. Even in the third round where you only have to, the early third round where you only have to start one quarterback, is that still too late for Jalen Hurts? Should he be going higher? And quite frankly, as we look at this, should Hurts be going ahead of Mahomes or even Josh Allen?
Yeah, I mean, Hurts is my QB1 this year. The way that they, use him at the goal line, I mean, he is their goal line back, and he also is somebody who has it within his range of outcomes where he can throw for 4,500 or 5,000 yards. I mean, he's got arguably the best 1-2 punch of receivers in the league with A.J. Brown and Devonta Smith. He's got ability to rush anywhere on the field, and he gets all of the goal line touches. I'm taking him in the late second round right now. And I don't know if I fully agree with how high quarterbacks are going right now. I think as we get a little bit closer to week 1, we'll see all of them start to get pushed down, but you got to play the game to some extent. And right now, if everybody's taking these elite quarterbacks this early, I've got to get in and get some of these guys. I don't want to have no exposure to the elite, tier of quarterbacks. And I'm okay taking Jalen Hurts rather than Josh Allen and Patrick Mahomes.
I have a theory on why the quarterbacks are being pushed up. The elite quarterbacks are being pushed up.
I do too. So I want to hear yours.
Well,
I wonder if we have the same one.
So normally I don't play in a whole lot. I play in some super flex, but mostly I play in single quarterback leagues. I always wait on quarterback. I used to do it way too late. Like there was one league I was in, like a high stakes league I was in. This is probably 7 or 8 years ago. And I literally forgot I was coming up on my last few picks of the draft and I didn't have a kicker. I didn't have a defense yet. And I didn't have a quarterback yet. And somebody at the draft table played, hey, Balky, you still don't have a quarterback. Oh my God. So that was that. I took it too far at that time. And I ended that was a train wreck of a team. But I do want to tell you that I usually still wait to when there's probably about 10 or 11, sometimes 12 quarterbacks off the board. Then I'll go not only one quarterback, but I'll usually draft the second one right away. One of the things that I have noticed over the years, my really successful teams where I grab quarterbacks there, if I hit on them, the team usually turns out pretty great. But in those leagues where I wait on quarterbacks and I don't hit on like a potential, like a fringe top 5 guy there, like Lamar Jackson was for us, whatever it was 4 years ago, 2019. If I don't hit on that, my team's pretty mediocre, and it's tough to get around that. Now, last year, I felt like, and I was one of the players who waited on quarterback, I did not go after the elite guys, the Hurts, the Allens, the Mahomes, the Jacksons, whatever it was. I did not hit on those. I did not grab those in drafts, and it cost me. And then I looked at some of the teams in the standings ahead of me. They all had elite guys. So my theory is this year, there's a lot of teams that waited, a lot of dynasty player or redraft players that waited on quarterback last year, missed out on the elite guys, and inevitably it cost them to miss out on the playoffs as well. So I think this year, fantasy players are putting more of a premium to get those elite guys, and as a result, they're being pushed up the board. That's my theory.
So maybe I'm just a little bit too cocky after last year, but the 2 guys that I waited on and drafted a ton of last year were Justin Fields and Trevor Lawrence.
Okay.
So I waited on quarterbacks last year, and I did fine.
I'm going to stop you right there, okay? Usually, okay, by the way,
that's even higher than you're saying.
Yes, that was a fantastic job.
They were 9-10 QB.
Right.
Yeah.
When I waited on quarterback, I probably just waited too long because my quarterbacks were Dak Prescott. My quarterbacks were Mac
Jones, Zach Wilson.
Now I didn't take it to that level, but like Derek Carr was another one. Derek Carr was all right last year, but I did miss out on I missed out on Fields. I did get Lawrence in a couple of spots, but I'll tell you what did pay off for me in a couple of my leagues. The benefit of having Prescott get hurt, and I think Stafford got hurt right away too, didn't he? If I remember correctly. The guys I got off the waiver wire, Jared Goff and Geno Smith, and they carried my teams for quite a bit. So last year I waited on quarterback. I didn't draft the correct ones like you did.
And then you found them on waivers.
And then I found, not to the level of Fields and Lawrence, but yeah, I found suitable guys. Yeah.
So my theory is, especially on Underdog, where you're seeing these guys really, really get pushed up, is because they do a lot of the weekly slates. And on those like single, like if you're just playing Sunday afternoon, a lot of times there's only 2 elite guys there. So you'd see Lamar Jackson and Jalen Hurts would be the first 2 guys off the board. Patrick Mahomes and Josh Allen would be the first 2 guys off the board. And I think that a lot of people just got conditioned with the in-season stuff, seeing quarterbacks go so early, that once the season and the single slate game or the single day, week-long games, once those ended and people started drafting for season long, it was just kind of already wired in their brains to take quarterbacks early.
We're running out of time, but I do want to hit on this because we did not talk a lot of Dynasty tonight as far as rookies go. And it was by design. And some viewers might say, well, why aren't we talking more about this? We're coming up on the NFL draft. You have a unique way of looking at rookies. And I know you've touched on it already a little bit tonight, but I want you to kind of elaborate on that. Why is it so important for you not to get caught in the minutia of watching film and checking relative athletic scores and everything like that with rookies now? Why is it important for you to wait to see their landing spot and then sort of go off and figure out where these rookies should be ranked?
Well, first of all, I feel like I see people year after year suffer from take lock. They fall in love with the prospect, and then 3 years later, that prospect has sucked in the NFL, and they're still pounding the table for him because they fell in love with him while they were in college. So that's something that I have noticed is a huge blind spot in a lot of people's analysis, and I don't want to be the guy that suffers from that. So for me, I just kind of let the NFL do the work for me. When I've tried doing drafts before the NFL draft, last year, Isaiah Spiller was a guy that caught my attention, and I drafted him in almost every single pre-NFL draft. And then what happened? He slid, was basically worthless. Malik Willis was another guy that, I'd kind of gotten enamored with in the pre-draft process, and he ended up sliding to the third round, didn't do anything in fantasy. So I let the NFL do the work for me at this point. I wait until the NFL draft. I see where these players land. Adam Harstad over at Football Guys is a much smarter man than I, and I think that he has the best approach when it comes to analyzing rookie wide receivers. Just draft the guys that were drafted in the first round. It's that simple. If a guy's got first round draft capital, draft him. And really, that is kind of the secret to success. I also think that you can learn more about a player in their rookie year than you can through their entire college career. Looking at colleges where they're playing against subpar talents, there's so many metrics that go into it that you can twist the numbers to tell any story you really want. I want to see exactly how a guy looks week one when he hits an NFL field and has to play against that talent, and that's where my evaluation starts.
You mentioned at the top of the show, you are one-stop shop for all the Dave Kluge content. Footballguys.com is where to go, right?
Yes, sir.
At Dave Kluge on Twitter, the Launchpad, anywhere you get podcasts. I know the last published one you had, or at least I had it up here originally. You had Matt Harmon, Alfredo Brown on that one, but you had C.H. Herms, and I forget the other one that you said you just recorded today.
Nate Polvote over at Player Profiler.
Exactly. So, and that'll be coming out. Is that already dropped, or is that going to drop tomorrow?
We did just this afternoon, and we talk about our favorite targets and fades based on underdog ADP.
The Launchpad is where you can find Dave Kluge in audio form, written form, footballguys.com, and on Twitter at Dave Kluge. Dave, I had a blast. I learned so much. This was awesome. Thanks so much for doing the show, man. I appreciate it.
Of course, man. Thank you. And the beard looks great, by the way. I've been trying to work that into the conversation for the last 2 hours. You were baby face last time I saw you, man. It looks great. Keep it up.
Yeah. I can't remember the last time my hair's been this long on my face or on my head. So I definitely am due for a haircut. I want to thank Dave Kluge, our producer, Anthony Rivera. We're back 7-6 Central next Thursday. Remember to go to myffpc.com. You can win $25,000 in the FFPC Never Too Early Best Ball Tournament. You can also go there to pick up some Dynasty Orphans as well. Again, those go from anywhere from $77 to $2,500 normally, but some of those are priced down as low as $1, and you can get those right now at myffpc.com. While you're there, you can check out all the great startup drafts that we have going on at the $100 level. We have live drafts, we have slow drafts. Some start before the NFL draft, some start after the NFL draft. So whatever you want, we have it for you there right now. I want to thank I already did thank Anthony Rivera. Did a great job on the rundown tonight. Remember to check out Dave's rankings at footballguys.com. The pieces that we talked about on the program tonight, the Dynasty running back landscape, Dynasty wide receiver landscape, those pieces are found at footballguys.com. We didn't get a chance to talk about the assessing the quarterback landscape in Dynasty. That is already up at footballguys.com. And as Dave said, the tight end one he is working on right now, the FFPC tight end premium guys will definitely care about that. You can check that out over at footballguys.com. Dynasty Nerds with Garrett Price is up next. I wanted to promo next week's show, but I can't tease it yet because I haven't gotten final confirmation from Garrett on it. But there's a chance Garrett might be on this show next week, and I might be on Garrett's show next week with Dynasty Nerds. Yeah, it's going to be a 4-hour bonanza on Thursday night if we can make it happen. I don't want to promise anything, but it could happen next week. That's going to be a lot of fun. We're 2 weeks away from the NFL draft. We're having a lot of fun. Thanks so much. He's Dave Kluge. From Football Guys, I'm Eric Balkman from the FFPC, the High Stakes Fantasy Football Hour, and the RotoViz High Stakes Lowdown. Garrett Price is up next with Dynasty Nerds. This is the Better Sports Network.